Close your eyes. Feel the warmth settle into your skin, the kind of warmth that means the day is done. Somewhere beyond the walls of this room, a river moves through darkness. You can hear it if you listen without trying, water pushing against stone, pulling away, pushing again. The air here smells of jasmine and something older, something like dust that has been resting on granite for a very long time. Maybe 500 years, maybe more. The lamp beside you burns low, the wick curled at its tip, the oil almost gone. Outside, the night is wide and soft. You are not anywhere you can name, and that is exactly where you need to be. The stories that follow are not for your mind to chase. Let them drift past like boats on that river. Let your breath find its own rhythm. Let the small muscles of your face soften, the ones around your eyes, the ones at the corners of your mouth. There is no need to hold anything. Tenali Rama is waiting somewhere between the river and the lamps, between the sound of water and the long, slow fall of night. You do not have to find him. He will find you. To know the man, you have to rest inside the world that made him. Not the way a student memorizes dates, but the way a traveller arrives at the edge of a city just as the sun begins to drop behind the hills. The Vijayanagara Empire was not simply a kingdom. It was a living thing carved into granite and river clay. The earth there, in the southern Deccan Plateau, had been sleeping for millennia before anyone built anything on it. Granite boulders the size of houses rose from the soil like half-buried giants, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and rain that had fallen before humans learned to count. Between them, the Tungabhadra River moved with the patience of something that had never once been in a hurry. The water was dark and deep, and when you looked into it, you saw the sky broken into pieces by ripples. Along the northern bank, for more than 30 kilometers, the city spread itself like a garment unfolded across the land. You can almost hear it now, if you let your mind go quiet. Temple bells rolling across the water at dawn, their bronze voices carrying for miles through air that was still cool from the night. Merchant carts loaded with spice and silk, their wooden wheels turning slowly over stone-paved roads. The low murmur of markets waking up, sellers of turmeric, of black pepper, of cotton dyed the colour of saffron, of pearls brought from distant coasts, where the sea was the colour of green glass, all of it rising and falling like a single breath. Above it all, the gopurams rose, the great temple towers, carved not by men in a hurry, but by hands that understood patience as a form of prayer. Every surface covered with figures, gods and goddesses, horses and elephants, warriors and dancers, all of them frozen in stone, but somehow still moving, still alive, still telling stories that had no end. The light there was different in the evenings, not the harsh white light of midday, but something gentler, gold and rose, and the soft blue of deepening shadow. Light that touched the carved granite and made the stone seem warm, almost soft, as if the rock itself was breathing. When the sun finally went behind the hills, the lamps appeared. First one, then another, then hundreds, then thousands. Oil lamps lit in homes and temples and along the river steps, each flame small and unsteady, but together they cast a glow that made the city seem to float between earth and sky. That was Vijayanagara. That was the world into which the stories of Tenali Rama would one day be spoken, and then spoken again, and then carried on the wind to places no one could name. The empire had been founded nearly 200 years before Tenali Rama drew his first breath. Two brothers, Harihara and Bukka, established it in the mid-14th century, building a kingdom that would become the last great Hindu empire of South India. By the time our story begins, the throne was held by a man whose name still echoes through those granite hills. Krishnadevaraya. He was a poet, a warrior, a patron of every art that could be named. He loved stories more than almost anything else in the world. His court was crowded with scholars and musicians, with dancers and philosophers, with men who could argue for hours about the nature of truth, and women who composed verses that made the temple bells seem crude by comparison. But there was something else in that court, something no other kingdom possessed. There was real laughter. Not the polite laughter of courtiers performing for favour. The kind that comes from surprise, from recognition, from the sudden delighted understanding that the world is stranger and more wonderful than you ever imagined. The man who brought that laughter was small and quick-eyed, from a village called Thalluru, near the town of Tenali. His name was Ramalinga, but everyone came to know him by the place of his birth. Tenali Rama, the poet who made kings pause mid-thought, the trickster who used stories the way a carpenter uses a plane, to smooth rough edges, to reveal the wood beneath the paint, to shape something useful from the chaos of the world. He was not tall, not handsome, not particularly strong. He owned no army. He commanded no wealth. What he possessed was something far rarer. He understood that a well-told story could do what swords could not. It could change a mind. It could open a heart that had closed itself against reason. It could make a king forget, for just a moment, that he was a king, and remember instead that he was a man, no different from the poorest farmer in his kingdom. Before he could stand before Krishnadevaraya, before he could trade riddles with the greatest scholars of the age, before he could become the Fakatakavi, the jester poet, whose name would outlive empires, Tenali Rama had to become himself. That journey began not in a palace, but in a small village, in a small house, on an ordinary day that no one present would have thought to remember. The air was warm. The river moved, and somewhere a child was learning that words had power. Let yourself drift a little further now. The village of Thalluru sits on the coastal plain of Andhra, not far from the Bay of Bengal. The land is flat and green. After rain, the air carries the smell of wet earth and the sweetness of sugarcane fields. In the 16th century, it was a quiet place, a cluster of houses with palm leaf roofs, surrounded by fields of rice and sugarcane. The people who lived there were farmers and weavers, potters and priests. They rose before dawn and worked until the light failed. They did not think of themselves as part of a great empire. They thought of themselves as part of a family, a village, a small circle of known faces and familiar sounds. Water being drawn from a well, a grinding stone turning spices into paste, children laughing somewhere in the dust, water buffalo lowing as they came home at dusk. It was there that a boy was born to a Brahmin couple named Ramaya and Lakshmana. The year is uncertain. Some say 1491, others say 1509. But the year matters less than the quality of the light on that day, which was ordinary, the temperature of the air, which was warm, the sound of the wind moving through the palm fronds, which was soft and steady and unchanged from 1,000 days before and 1,000 days after. The boy was given the name Ramalinga, after the god Rama, whom his parents worshipped with the quiet devotion of people who had never once doubted that the divine was present in every grain of rice, every drop of water, every breath drawn by every living thing. Childhood in a 16th century village was hard. Beautiful, but hard. The lessons were written in weather and harvest and the bodies of those who did not survive. Ramalinga's father died when the boy was still young. The details have been lost, as details always are when a poor man dies in a small village. No chronicler was present. No historian recorded the moment. Only the memory remained, passed down through stories, a father gone, a mother left to raise a clever, restless, difficult child on her own. Lakshmana did what widows in her position had always done. She worked, she prayed, she watched her son with a mixture of pride and worry, because she could see, even then, that his mind moved differently than other children's minds. He asked questions that had no easy answers. Why must the poor remain poor? Why do learned men speak in circles instead of speaking clearly? Why is a story less valuable than a coin, when a story can feed a hungry heart and a coin can only fill a stomach? The village elders smiled at his questions and shook their heads. They told his mother the boy would grow out of it. He did not. He grew into it. His questions became sharper, his observations more precise. His sense of the gap between how the world should be and how the world actually was grew more acute with each passing year. He learned the Vedas from the local priest, reciting sacred verses in Sanskrit with a memory that seemed to hold everything it was given. But he also listened to the ordinary people, the farmers, the weavers, the women drawing water from the well. He learnt their language too, the language of daily life, of complaint and hope, of the small clevernesses that keep a family fed when the harvest fails. This was his first education, not in a university or a temple school, in the marketplace, the street, the threshold of his mother's kitchen. He learnt that a man who could make people laugh could also make them listen. He learnt that a story about a foolish merchant or a greedy priest could teach a truth that a sermon never could. He learnt that the powerful are often the easiest to fool, because they have surrounded themselves with people who will not tell them the truth. A man who has never been laughed at, Tenali Rama would later understand, is a man who has forgotten that he is human. The path from Thalluru to Vijayanagara was not straight, not quick. It was a long, winding road of hunger and disappointment, of doors that closed and patrons who turned away, of nights spent sleeping under temple eaves and days spent trading verses for a handful of rice. The young man had no money, no family connections, no reputation. What he had was a mind like a razor and a tongue that could cut both ways, toward cruelty or toward kindness, depending on the choice he made in the moment. In those early years, he did not always choose kindness. There are stories, preserved in the oral tradition, of a young Tenali Rama who was sharp and impatient, who used his wit to embarrass the proud and mock the foolish, who took a kind of pleasure in watching a pompous scholar twist in the wind of his own confusion. He was not cruel, exactly, but he was not yet wise. The difference between cleverness and wisdom is a difference that can only be learned through failure. His failure came in the form of a moment he would later be grateful for. He had travelled to the court of a local chieftain, hoping to be taken on as a court poet. He had prepared his best verses, memorised his most impressive quotations, dressed himself in his cleanest clothes. The chieftain was not impressed. He looked at the young man from Thalluru, thin, unadorned, without a patron's letter or a famous teacher's blessing, and turned away. Not with cruelty, with indifference. Cruelty at least acknowledges your existence. Indifference erases you. Tenali Rama walked out of that court with nothing, not even the satisfaction of having been rejected memorably. He was simply not seen. He wandered for days after that, sleeping in the open, eating what he could find. On one of those nights, lying beneath a banyan tree whose roots descended from the branches like the fingers of a sleeping god, he dreamed. Or perhaps he did not dream. Perhaps what happened was real in a way that ordinary reality is not. The version of the story that has survived for 5 centuries goes like this. Tenali Rama, exhausted and hungry, made his way to a temple dedicated to the goddess Kali. The temple was old, built of dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of camphor and burnt offerings. A single lamp burned near the goddess's feet, casting shadows that moved across her face in ways that made her seem alive. Tenali Rama knelt. He was not a particularly devout man. His faith was like his wit, sharp and questioning, but he was desperate. Desperation has its own kind of sincerity. He prayed. Not for wealth or fame, for understanding. He wanted to know why the world worked as it did, why the clever went hungry while the dull sat at full tables. What he was missing, what blind spot in his own vision, kept him from the life he could almost see, but could not reach. As he prayed, the shadows in the temple deepened. The lamp flickered, though there was no wind. From the stone lips of the goddess, a voice came. Not loud, not dramatic, a voice like the sound of a river moving underground, old, patient, full of darkness and light together. The goddess Kali spoke to him, and what she said changed the course of his life. She offered him a choice. In her hands, she held 2 bowls. One bowl contained wisdom, the deep, serious wisdom of the sages, the kind that comes from years of meditation and study. The other bowl contained laughter, the bright, sharp laughter of the fool, the kind that sees through pretense and speaks truth without fear. You may have one, she said, not both. Choose. Tenali Rama looked at the 2 bowls. He looked at the goddess's dark stone face. He understood something that no one had taught him. Wisdom without laughter becomes arrogance. Laughter without wisdom becomes cruelty. A man who carries both, even if he can only hold one in each hand, a man who can be serious about the things that matter and light about the things that do not. That man can walk anywhere in the world and find his way home. He reached out and took both bowls. The goddess laughed. Not in anger, in delight. The sound filled the temple, echoed off the dark stones, rolled out into the night where the banyan tree waited and the river moved, and the stars turned slowly overhead. She had not expected this. She was pleased. She blessed him. You shall have both wisdom and laughter, she said. You shall speak truth in a way that makes kings listen. Your stories shall outlive stone. You chose to hold 2 things that were never meant to be held together. That choice will make you light enough to float and heavy enough to matter. Go now. The world is waiting for its fool. When Tenali Rama opened his eyes, the temple was quiet. The lamp burned steadily. The shadows had stopped moving. He did not know whether he had dreamed or woken. He felt different. Lighter. More solid. He walked out of the temple into the dawn. The world looked different, softer, stranger, full of possibilities he had never noticed before. He began the long walk toward Vijayanagara, toward the court of Krishnadevaraya, toward the stories that would carry his name across 500 years to a listener lying somewhere in the dark, breathing slowly, drifting just at the edge of sleep. The road to Vijayanagara was long, and the young man who walked it was no longer the same person who had left Thalluru. The encounter in the temple had changed something fundamental in him, though he could not have said exactly what. The dust on the road was still dust. The sun was still hot. His stomach still growled with hunger. His feet still ached. But beneath all of that, a new feeling had taken root. A lightness in his chest. A quiet confidence that the story of his life had already been written, and that he did not need to chase it. He only needed to walk. The story would meet him where he was. He walked through villages where women offered him water from clay pots, and children followed him for a few steps. Curious about the thin man with the bright eyes who seemed to be talking to himself, he walked through markets where merchants shouted prices and customers shouted back, where the smell of frying bread mixed with the smell of dung and incense, and the sharp, sweet perfume of jasmine garlands. He walked through groves of mango and tamarind, where the shade was thick and cool, and the sound of birds filled the air with a kind of wild, unorganized music. As he walked, he practiced. He told himself stories. He argued with imaginary opponents. He tested the edge of his wit against the ordinary moments of the day, the stubborn donkey that would not move from the path, the farmer who had dropped a sack of grain, the old woman who sat by the roadside telling her beads and watching the world go by with eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. Each night, when the sky turned deep blue and the first stars appeared, he found a place to rest. Sometimes a temple courtyard where the stone was still warm from the day's sun. Sometimes the root of a banyan tree where the earth was soft and the branches above him made a kind of ceiling against the dew. Sometimes simply the side of the road, with nothing but his own thin arms for a pillow and the sound of insects for a lullaby. He did not mind. The discomfort of his body seemed less important now. His mind had found a home inside itself, and that home travelled with him wherever he went. The goddess had given him permission to hold two things at once. He was learning what that meant. He learnt that laughter and seriousness are two sides of the same door. A man who cannot laugh at himself has built walls around his own heart. A man who cannot be serious about the suffering of others has forgotten that he is human. Tenali Rama wanted to stand in the middle, where the light is soft and the shadows are long, and truth can be spoken without breaking anything important. That was the gift of the goddess. Not wisdom alone, not laughter alone. The strange, difficult, beautiful balance between them. Balance does not come easily. It comes through practice, through failure, through moments when the weight shifts too far in one direction and the whole thing tips over. Tenali Rama would have many such moments in the years ahead. Times when his wit cut too deep, when his laughter came at the wrong time, when his cleverness made him enemies instead of friends. The goddess had given him the tools. She had not given him the skill to use them. That skill would have to be learnt the hard way, through the slow, patient work of living among other people and discovering where the line was drawn between truth and cruelty, between humour and harm. Before he could learn those lessons, he had to reach the city. And the city, when it finally appeared on the horizon, was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had heard stories of Vijayanagara, of course. Everyone in South India had heard stories of Vijayanagara. But stories are just words, and words cannot prepare you for the sight of it rising from the plain. The granite hills crowned with temples, the river curving through the valley like a silver serpent. The walls and gates and towers and bazaars spreading out in every direction as far as the eye could see. It was not a city, it was a world. Tenali Rama stood at the edge of it with dust on his feet and hope in his chest. He felt very small. He also felt very lucky. He was young, and the city was old, and somewhere inside those walls, a king was waiting for a story he did not yet know he needed to hear. But before Tenali Rama could stand before Krishnadevaraya, we must go back. Back to Thalluru. To the beginning. To the small house where a boy first learned that words could shape the world. The man who walked into Vijayanagara was not born in a temple. He was born in a village, to a mother who loved him and a father who died too soon. The story of that childhood, the hunger, the mischief, the first flickers of the wit that would make him famous, is a story worth telling, slowly, gently, with all the patience that a good night's sleep requires. Let the river of the story slow now, as the Tungabhadra slows where the channel widens and the water spreads thin over sand. Let the air cool, as it cools in the evening when the sun has gone behind the hills and the shadows stretch long across the fields. Let us walk together, without hurry, into the childhood of Tenali Rama, the boy who would become the trickster, the jester, the fool who was wiser than any scholar in the court of the greatest king South India has ever known. The village of Thalluru was not a place that expected to produce greatness. It was humble. Travellers passed through without noticing it. It appeared on no map of importance. The houses were small and close together, their walls made of mud, their roofs of dried palm leaves. The streets were dust, except when the rains came, and then they were mud. The well sat at the centre of the village. Around it the women gathered each morning and each evening, filling their pots and exchanging the news of the day: who had given birth, who had died, whose crops were failing, whose daughter was to be married. An ordinary place. Yet in that ordinary place, an extraordinary mind was taking shape. The boy Ramalinga was not an easy child. That is what the neighbours said, shaking their heads with a mixture of affection and exasperation. He was too curious, too quick, too ready with a question that had no polite answer. When the village priest explained the scriptures, the boy listened carefully and then asked why the gods allowed suffering. When the merchant weighed out rice, the boy watched the scales and asked why the poor man's measure was always smaller than the rich man's. When the elders gathered to discuss village business, the boy stood at the edge of the circle, listening, then walked away muttering to himself about the foolishness of men who confuse tradition with wisdom. He was not disrespectful, exactly. He simply could not stop himself from seeing the gap between what people said and what people did. Once he had seen it, he could not stop himself from pointing it out. His mother, Lakshmama, worried about him. She worried that his sharp tongue would make enemies, that his refusal to accept easy answers would leave him alone in a world that valued conformity. That his father's death had left a wound in him that no one could see, a wound that expressed itself not in tears, but in questions, in arguments, in the restless energy of a mind that could not find peace. She did her best to raise him well. She taught him to honour the gods, to respect his elders, to share what little he had with those who had even less. He listened to her. He loved her. He could not be the son she had imagined, the quiet, obedient boy who would grow into a quiet, obedient man. He was something else. Something the village had no name for. When he was old enough, he was sent to study with the village priest. The traditional path for a Brahmin boy, to learn the Vedas, to memorize the sacred verses, to prepare for a life of ritual and scholarship. Ramalinga learned. His memory was extraordinary, almost frightening in its capacity. He could hear a verse once and repeat it back perfectly, even weeks later. He could recite long passages from the ancient texts without a single mistake, his voice steady and clear, his pronunciation exact. The priest was impressed despite himself. He was also frustrated. The boy would not stop asking questions. Not the respectful questions of a student seeking clarification, the dangerous questions of a mind that refused to accept authority simply because it was authority. Why does this verse say one thing, while that verse says another? How can both be true? If both are true, what use is truth? The priest had no answers. He had never been asked such questions. He had learnt the verses as a boy, taught them as a man, never once stopped to wonder whether they made sense when placed side by side. That was not the purpose of the verses. The purpose was to be recited, honoured, passed down unchanged. Understood? No obeyed Ramalinga could not obey something he did not understand. It was not stubbornness, though it looked like stubbornness. It was a hunger for coherence, for a world that made sense, for a truth that could hold up under the weight of questioning. The priest eventually gave up on him, not angrily. Sadly, he told Lakshmama that her son was too clever for his own good, that his mind would be his ruin, that he would never find a place in the world, because the world had no place for people who asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. Lakshmama listened. She nodded. She went home to cook rice over a small fire. She wondered what would become of her strange, bright, difficult child. She did not have an answer. She had hope. Hope, in a village like Thalluru, was sometimes the only wealth a person could claim. So the boy grew, as boys do, with no clear path ahead of him. He helped his mother with the chores. He ran errands for the neighbours. He sat in the shade of the banyan tree at the edge of the village and watched the world go by. He listened. That was his real education, not the Vedas, not the lessons of the priest, but the ordinary, unending flow of human speech that surrounded him every day. He listened to the farmers arguing about the price of grain. He listened to the women laughing by the well. He listened to the children inventing games with nothing but stones and sticks and their own wild imaginations. Slowly, without planning to, he began to understand something that no scripture had ever taught him. Stories are the currency of human life. We trade them, borrow them, steal them, and reshape them, and make them our own. A person who knows how to tell a good story will never go hungry, because everyone is hungry for stories. Everyone wants to be carried away from their own small lives into a world where anything is possible. He began to tell stories himself. At first, just to the village children who gathered around him in the evenings when the work was done and the light was fading. He told them tales from the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but he told them differently than the priest did. He added details that were not in the original texts. He made the gods seem more human, more confused, more like the people the children knew. He gave the demons jokes and the heroes flaws. He made the stories live. The children loved him. They came back night after night, bringing their younger siblings, bringing their friends, sitting in a wide circle around the banyan tree while the stars came out one by one and the sounds of the village settled into silence. Ramalinga discovered that he loved making people listen. He loved watching their faces change as the story unfolded, the widening eyes, the held breath, the sudden laugh that burst out at an unexpected moment. He loved holding an audience in his hands, gently, the way a potter holds wet clay before it becomes a cup. But the village was small. The audience was small. Ramalinga was not content to be a village storyteller. He wanted more. He wanted to test himself against the greatest minds of his age. He wanted to stand before kings and scholars and make them laugh and think in the same moment. He wanted to be the kind of storyteller whose name was remembered long after his body had returned to the earth. When he was old enough, he left. He kissed his mother's forehead. He felt her tears on his cheek. He promised to return. Then he turned and walked down the dusty road that led away from Thalluru, toward the wider world, toward the unknown. He did not look back. Looking back, he had learned, was something people did when they were not sure they had made the right choice. He was sure. He did not know what he would find. He knew that he had to go. The years that followed were hard. There is no gentle way to tell that part of the story. He travelled from town to town, from court to court, offering his skills as a poet and storyteller to anyone who would listen. Sometimes he was fed and given a place to sleep. Sometimes he was turned away. Sometimes he was mocked, a thin, ragged young man with no patron and no reputation, daring to call himself a poet. The established scholars, the men with titles and land, and the favour of local kings, looked at him and saw nothing worth their attention. He was not humble enough, not polished enough. He did not speak the right way, or dress the right way, or bow low enough when he entered a room. They dismissed him, not cruelly, most of them. Carelessly, they had no time for a nobody from nowhere. Bitterness began to creep in. The young man who had left Thalluru with such hope began to harden. His wit, once playful, became sharp. His tongue, once quick to make people laugh, became quick to make people wince. He started to enjoy the discomfort of the pompous and the powerful. He started to take pleasure in exposing their ignorance, their hypocrisy, their small vanities. It was satisfying. It was not wise. The people he embarrassed remembered. They did not forget. A man who makes enemies of the powerful will find every door closed to him, no matter how clever his verses or how sharp his wit. He did not see this at the time. He saw only that the world was unfair, that the deserving went hungry, while the undeserving feasted, that the only way to get ahead was to be louder and sharper and more ruthless than the people who stood in his way. The goddess's gift of laughter had tipped too far in one direction. He had become clever. Quick, devastating in an argument. He had not yet become wise. Intelligence is the ability to see the truth. Wisdom is knowing when to speak it, when to remain silent, and how to tell the difference. The failure that finally brought him to his knees came in the court of a minor chieftain, a man of no particular importance whose name has been forgotten by history. Tenali Rama had travelled far to reach this court, surviving on scraps and sleeping in fields. He had prepared his best verses. Dressed as well as he could, though his clothes were thin and patched, practiced his presentation until he could deliver it in his sleep. When he was finally admitted to the chieftain's presence, he gave the performance of his life. The verses flowed from him like water from a spring. His voice was strong and clear. His gestures were precise and elegant. By any objective measure, he was brilliant. The chieftain listened. When Tenali Rama finished, the chieftain turned to his court poet, a fat, complacent man who had held his position for decades without producing a single memorable line, and asked for his opinion. The court poet shrugged. He had not been listening. He had been thinking about his dinner. The verses, he said, were adequate. Nothing more. The chieftain nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. He thanked Tenali Rama for his time and gestured for the guards to show him out. No position, no reward, not even a meal, just out. Tenali Rama walked out of that court in a daze. He had done everything right. He had been better than the poet who had dismissed him. Infinitely better. Obviously better. Better in ways that anyone with ears could hear. He had lost. The fat, complacent, untalented poet had won, simply because he had been there longer, because he knew the right people, because the chieftain valued comfort over excellence. The world did not reward merit. It rewarded connections. Patience, the willingness to play a game that had nothing to do with truth or beauty. Tenali Rama did not know how to play that game. He only knew how to be brilliant. Brilliance, he was learning, was not enough. He wandered for days after that, too ashamed to return to the villages where he had been welcomed, too proud to beg, too angry to think clearly. He ate roots and berries, drank from streams, slept in the open, waking each morning with the taste of dust in his mouth and the weight of failure pressing on his chest. His clothes tore, his feet bled. By the time he reached the temple of Kali, he looked like a ghost of the young man who had left Thalluru with such hope. That was the state he was in when he knelt before the dark stone goddess and prayed for understanding. The temple was old. Even through the fog of his exhaustion, he noticed that. Built of stone so dark, it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The walls were carved with figures that appeared to move in the flickering lamplight. Demons and goddesses, animals and flowers, scenes from stories so old that no one remembered their origins. The air was thick with the smell of camphor and burnt offerings, and also with something older, something that had soaked into the stone over centuries of prayers and tears and the small, desperate hopes of ordinary people. Tenali Rama knelt on the cold floor. He had no offering to give, no flowers, no coins, no incense, only his hunger, his exhaustion, his anger, his sorrow. He laid them at the goddess's feet like a beggar laying down his last handful of dust. He prayed. Not the formal prayers he had learnt as a boy, the Sanskrit verses that rolled off his tongue without touching his heart. He prayed in his own words, the rough Telugu of the village, the language of farmers and weavers and women drawing water from the well. He told the goddess everything. His hopes, his failures, his fear that he had been born wrong, wired wrong, that his mind was a gift that had turned into a curse. He told her about the chieftain's court and the fat poet who had not even listened. About his mother, waiting in Thalluru, praying for a son who had promised to return but had not yet found anything worth returning with, about the hunger in his belly and the deeper hunger in his heart. The hunger to matter, to be seen, to leave something behind that would outlast his fragile, failing body. The shadows in the temple deepened. The lamp near the goddess's feet flickered, though there was no wind. The air grew heavy, thick, with a presence that was not quite a presence, a weight that was not quite a weight. From the stone lips of the goddess, a voice came. It was not a human voice, deeper than human, older than human, the voice of something that had been watching the world long before the first temple was built, long before the first prayer was spoken. It said his name. Ramalinga, for the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. The goddess appeared to him then, not as a statue, as a living presence, dark and radiant, terrible and beautiful, with eyes that held the darkness between the stars and the light of a billion suns. She held in her hands 2 bowls. One bowl was made of gold and shone with a soft, steady light. The other bowl was made of clay and seemed to laugh even in stillness, its surface rippling with an energy that had no name. "You may have one," she said, "not both. One. Choose." The golden bowl contained wisdom, the deep, still wisdom of the sages, the wisdom that comes from years of meditation and renunciation, the wisdom that sees the world as it is and does not flinch. The clay bowl contained laughter, the bright, wild laughter of the fool, the laughter that breaks through pretense and punctures pride, the laughter that reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. Tenali Rama looked at the 2 bowls. He understood that the goddess was not testing him. She was offering him a genuine choice. He could have either gift, fully and completely. He could not have both. The wise man cannot be the fool. The fool cannot be the wise man. The world asks us to choose, to specialize, to become one thing instead of another. He had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. He looked at the goddess with eyes that had seen too much and not enough. He looked at the 2 bowls. Very slowly, very carefully, he reached out with both hands. He took the golden bowl in his right hand. He took the clay bowl in his left hand. He held them both. The goddess watched, her dark eyes unreadable, her stone face holding an expression that might have been anger, and might have been delight, and might have been something beyond both. A long moment of silence. The lamp flickered, the shadows held their breath. Then, the goddess laughed. Not a small laugh, not a polite laugh, the laugh of a mother watching her child do something impossible, something that should not have worked, something that broke all the rules and somehow succeeded anyway. A laughter filled the temple, echoed off the dark stones, rolled out into the night where the banyan tree waited and the river moved and the stars turned slowly overhead. "You fool," she said. "You beautiful, impossible fool. You have done what no one has done before. You have taken both. Because you have taken both, you shall have both. Remember, you chose this. You chose to carry 2 weights that were never meant to be carried together. You will stumble. You will fall. There will be days when the wisdom feels too heavy and the laughter feels too light. You will get up again. You will keep walking. Your name will be remembered long after the stones of this temple have turned to dust." When Tenali Rama opened his eyes, the temple was quiet. The lamp burned steadily. The shadows had stopped moving. He was alone, kneeling on the cold stone floor, with nothing but the memory of the goddess's laughter echoing in his chest. He did not know whether he had dreamed or woken. He knew that something had changed. The hunger in his belly was still there. The exhaustion in his bones was still there. Beneath them, deeper than them, a new feeling had taken root. A kind of peace, a kind of certainty. He did not need to prove himself anymore. He did not need to be the cleverest man in the room or the most brilliant poet, or the sharpest wit. He only needed to be what he was, a man who could hold two things at once, who could laugh and weep in the same breath, who could tell a story that made kings forget they were kings and remember instead that they were human. He stood up. His knees ached. His back ached. Everything ached. He was alive, and the night was ending, and somewhere to the west, the city of Vijayanagara waited. He walked out of the temple into the dawn. The world looked different, softer, stranger, full of possibilities he had never noticed before. The dust on the road was still dust. The sun was still hot. Now, beneath the dust and the heat, there was something else. A hum. A rhythm. The sound of the story that was already being told. The story that he was already living. The story that would carry him forward, whether he walked quickly or slowly or not at all. He smiled. He had no idea what was coming. He was ready enough. For a man who had just been blessed by a goddess, ready enough was exactly the right amount. The road from the temple to Vijayanagara was not long, but Tenali Rama walked it slowly. There was no hurry now. The blessing was not a thing to be rushed. It was a thing to be carried carefully, like a lamp filled with oil that must not be spilled. He walked at the pace of the oxen in the fields, at the pace of the river moving through the plain, at the pace of the shadows as they stretched and shortened and stretched again with the turning of the sun. He passed through villages where women were winnowing rice and children were chasing goats and old men were sitting in doorways, watching the world go by with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He nodded to them as he passed. Sometimes they nodded back. Sometimes they did not. It did not matter. He was not looking for recognition. He was looking for the city. The city appeared on the horizon like nothing he had ever imagined. He had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in South India had heard stories of Vijayanagara, the city of victory, the capital of the greatest empire the South had ever known. Stories are just words. Words cannot prepare you for the sight of it rising from the plain like a mountain range carved by gods. The granite hills that surrounded the city were ancient beyond memory, worn smooth by wind and rain that had fallen for millennia. Between them, the Tungabhadra River curved in a wide silver arc, its water dark and deep, reflecting the sky in fragments broken by ripples. Along the river's northern bank, for more than 30 kilometers, the city spread like a garment unfolded across the land. Walls and gates and towers and temples, bazaars and palaces and gardens and granaries, streets paved with stone, lined with houses painted in colours that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Everywhere, the sound of people. Thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000, perhaps more. Living and working and praying and trading and arguing and laughing and weeping and dying and being born, all within the shelter of those walls. Tenali Rama stood at the edge of the city for a long time, just looking. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western hills, and the light had turned soft and golden, touching the granite with warmth and the river with fire. He could smell the city from where he stood, cooking oil and incense, flowers and spices, dung and sweat, and something else. Something that might have been hope, or might have been desperation, or might have been both, mixed so thoroughly that they could no longer be separated. He took a breath, let it out, walked forward into the shadow of the great gate, into the city that would make him or break him, or perhaps do a little of both. The gate itself was a marvel, made of stone, carved with figures of gods and goddesses, warriors and elephants, scenes of battle and scenes of celebration. Above the archway, an inscription in Sanskrit announced that this was the city of Krishnadevaraya, the Lord of the Earth, the protector of the Dharma, the king whose name would be remembered as long as the sun continued to rise. Tenali Rama passed beneath the archway and found himself in a different world. The road inside the gate was wide enough for 6 carts to pass side by side. On either side, shops and stalls offered everything a person could want: silk and cotton, gold and silver, spices and grains, pottery and jewellery, books and scrolls, fruits and vegetables, and sweets and breads. The merchants called out to him as he passed, inviting him to look, to touch, to buy. He had nothing to buy. He looked anyway. The goods on display were unlike anything he had seen in the villages of his childhood. Pearls from the Gulf of Mannar, diamonds from the mines of Golconda, silks from China, spices from the islands of the East, horses from Arabia, ivory from Africa, rare woods from the mountains of the north. The whole world had come to Vijayanagara, and the whole world was for sale. Tenali Rama was not interested in goods. He was interested in people. The people of Vijayanagara were as various as the goods they bought and sold. Brahmins in clean white cloth, their foreheads marked with the symbols of their sect, warriors in armour, swords hanging from their belts, eyes scanning the crowd for threats no one else could see. Merchants in fine silks, bellies round with prosperity, voices loud with confidence. Farmers in rough cotton, hands calloused from the plough, faces weathered by the sun. Dancers and musicians and acrobats and beggars and priests and prostitutes and children and old people and every kind of human being that could be imagined, all moving together in a river of humanity that never stopped flowing. Tenali Rama walked among them like a ghost. No one noticed him. No one cared. He was just another stranger in a city of strangers, another face in a crowd of faces, another story that had not yet begun to be told. He found a place to sleep that night in a temple courtyard, curled up against a stone pillar with his thin arms wrapped around his knees. The night air was cool, but not cold. The stars were bright overhead, dimmed only slightly by the smoke from 1,000 cooking fires. He could hear the city settling into sleep, the last calls of the merchants, the last arguments of the drunks, the last prayers of the devout. Beneath all of that, the river. Always the river. Moving through the darkness, slow and patient and indifferent to the hopes and fears of the small creatures who lived along its banks. He fell asleep, listening to the sound of the water. He dreamed of nothing at all, which was a gift after so many nights of troubled dreams. The next morning he woke early, before the sun had cleared the hills. The temple courtyard was quiet, empty except for a few other sleepers who had not yet stirred. He washed his face in a basin of water near the shrine, straightened his clothes as best he could, and walked toward the centre of the city, toward the palace, toward the court of Krishnadevaraya. He did not know how he would gain entry. He had no patron, no letter of introduction, no reputation. He was nobody. He had the blessing of the goddess, and he had his wit, and he had the stubborn faith that somehow, somewhere, a door would open. It had to open. He had come too far to turn back now. The palace complex was even more impressive than the bazaar. Not one building but many, halls and courtyards and gardens and pavilions, spread out over an area so large that it took him most of the morning just to walk around the outer walls. The walls themselves were made of granite, carved with scenes of hunting and warfare and royal processions. Above the main gate, a massive sculpture of the god Vishnu reclining on the serpent Adishesha seemed to watch over everyone who entered. Tenali Rama paused before the gate, unsure of what to do next. Guards, of course. Tall men in polished armour, faces expressionless, hands resting on the hilts of their swords. They looked at him as he approached. He saw in their eyes the same dismissal he had seen 100 times before. He was nobody. Nothing. He did not belong here. He walked forward anyway. When the guard stepped forward to block his path, he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a pleading smile. A calm, quiet smile that seemed to say he knew something they did not. The guards hesitated. Confidence confuses people. People who expect begging are unsettled by calm. People who expect fear are disarmed by ease. The guards looked at each other, unsure of what to do with this thin, ragged stranger who was smiling at them as if he had every right to be there. In that moment of hesitation, Tenali Rama spoke. His voice was low and steady, neither loud nor soft, the voice of a man who had no need to shout because he knew he would be heard. "I have come to see the king," he said. "I have a story to tell him, a story he has never heard before." The guards frowned. Everyone who came to the palace claimed to have a story for the king. Everyone claimed to be special. The king was a busy man, a wise man, a man who had no time for every wandering poet who appeared at his gate. The guards began to shake their heads, to raise their hands in the gesture of refusal. Tenali Rama was not finished. "The story," he said, "is about a king who thought he had heard everything, and a fool who showed him otherwise." The guards stopped. Something in the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the gentle amusement, made them pause. Perhaps because they were bored, perhaps because they were curious, perhaps because something in the stranger's eyes reminded them of their own younger selves. They stepped aside, not all the way, just enough. Tenali Rama walked past them, through the gate, into the palace of the king. The courtyard inside was even more beautiful than the gate had suggested, paved with white stone that seemed to glow in the morning light. In the centre, a fountain sent a thin spray of water into the air, and the sound of it was cool and refreshing. Around the edges, flowering trees, jasmine and champak and hibiscus, filled the air with a sweetness that made him feel, for a moment, as if he had stepped into a dream. Beyond the courtyard, through an archway carved with lotus blossoms, he could see the hall of the court. The Durbar Hall, where Krishnadevaraya sat in judgment, received ambassadors, listened to petitions, presided over the business of empire. He walked toward it, his heart beating a little faster than he would have liked, his palms a little damper than he would have wished. He was nobody, nothing. He was walking into the presence of the most powerful man in South India. He had nothing to offer but his voice and his mind. The hall was enormous, larger than any room he had ever entered, larger than any temple he had ever visited, larger than the entire village of Thalluru. The ceiling was supported by rows of granite pillars, each one carved with figures from the epics, Rama and Sita, Krishna and Arjuna, the great heroes and heroines of the ancient stories. The floor was polished stone, so smooth that he could see his own reflection in it, a thin ghost of a man walking across a sea of light. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the throne of the Vijayanagara Empire. Gold and ivory, encrusted with rubies and emeralds and diamonds that caught the light and scattered it in 1,000 directions. On the throne, lounging with an ease that suggested he had been born there and would die there and never once doubted his right to be there, sat Krishnadevaraya. The king was not what Tenali Rama had expected. He had imagined a stern figure, a warrior king with a hard face and harder eyes. Krishnadevaraya was smiling. His face was round and warm, his eyes bright with intelligence, his expression curious rather than commanding. He was dressed simply, in white cotton, with a single strand of pearls around his neck and a small gold crown resting on his dark hair. He looked less like a king and more like a scholar, a man who had read too many books and thought too many thoughts and found the world more interesting than he had any right to expect. Around him, arranged in a semicircle on cushions of silk, sat the court, ministers and generals, poets and philosophers, dancers and musicians, astrologers and priests. All of them watched the new arrival with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright hostility. They did not like strangers. They did not like competition. They could see, even from a distance, that this thin man in ragged clothes had something in his eyes that made them uncomfortable. Tenali Rama walked to the center of the hall and stopped. He did not bow, he did not prostrate himself. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the king. The king looked back at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The court held its breath. The fountain in the courtyard could be heard through the open archway, a soft, steady sound like rain falling on stone. Then Krishnadevaraya spoke. His voice was warm and deep, the voice of a man who had spent his life speaking and being listened to. "Who are you?" he asked. "Why have you come to my court?" Tenali Rama smiled, the same calm, quiet smile he had given the guards. "I am Ramalinga," he said, "from the village of Thalluru. I have come to be your poet." A murmur from the court. The poets, the established poets, the men who had spent years climbing the ladder of favour, shifted on their cushions and exchanged glances of disbelief. The arrogance of this stranger, the audacity. To walk into the court of Krishnadevaraya without invitation, without reputation, and announce that he had come to be the king's poet. It was absurd, insulting, intriguing. The king leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with interest. "My court already has poets," he said. "Many poets, the finest poets in the land. Why should I replace them with you?" Tenali Rama shook his head. "I do not ask you to replace them, Your Majesty. I ask only to stand among them, to learn from them. Perhaps occasionally to offer a verse or two of my own." The poets frowned. They did not want this stranger standing among them. They did not want him learning from them. They did not want him offering verses. They wanted him gone, back to whatever village had produced him, back to the obscurity he so clearly deserved. The king was curious now. A curious king, as the poets well knew, was a dangerous thing. "Very well," said Krishnadevaraya, "let us see what you can do. The court poet Timurusu will ask you a question. Answer it well, and you may stay. Answer it poorly, and you will leave, and you will not return." The court turned to look at Timurusu, the chief poet, the man whose verses were praised throughout the empire, the man whose position had seemed unassailable until this moment. Timurusu was old, with a white beard and eyes that had seen too many ambitious young men come and go. He looked at Tenali Rama with a mixture of contempt and weariness. He had heard it all before. He had seen it all before. He was confident that this thin stranger would be no different from the rest. "You claim to be a poet," Timurusu said. "Tell me, what is poetry?" A trick question. It had no single answer. Any answer could be challenged, mocked, dismissed. Tenali Rama understood this immediately. He also understood that the old poet was testing him, not for his knowledge, but for his arrogance. The wrong answer would reveal him as a fool. The right answer, if there was a right answer, would reveal something else entirely. He paused. The court waited. The king waited. The fountain murmured in the courtyard, soft and steady. Tenali Rama spoke. "Poetry," he said, "is the art of saying one thing and meaning another. It is the art of telling the truth without being punished for it. It is the art of making a king laugh at himself. And thank you for the laughter." The court gasped. No one spoke to the king that way. No one suggested that the king needed to laugh at himself. No one was that foolish, or that brave, or that honest. Krishnadevaraya was not angry. He was laughing. A deep, warm, genuine laugh that filled the hall and echoed off the granite pillars. The court stared. The poets stared. Timurusu's face turned red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The king was laughing at his court poet's question, at the stranger's answer, at the whole ridiculous situation. When the laughter finally subsided, he looked at Tenali Rama with new eyes. "You are either very wise or very foolish," he said. "I cannot tell which." Tenali Rama shrugged. "Perhaps both, Your Majesty. The goddess gave me 2 bowls, and I took them both." The king raised an eyebrow. "The goddess? Which goddess?" Tenali Rama told the story. Not the whole story, that would take too long, and the court was growing restless, but enough. Enough to explain the temple, the two bowls, the voice from the stone lips, the laughter that had filled the night. He told it simply, without drama, without embellishment. When he finished, the king was silent for a long time. Then Krishnadevaraya spoke, his voice soft and thoughtful. "You have been blessed. You have been tested. You have come to my court, not with gold or silver, but with a story. That is a good beginning." He turned to Timurusu. "Find him a place. Not among the poets, not yet. Somewhere, let him stay. Let us see what else he has to say." Timurusu nodded, his face tight with displeasure. He did not argue. He knew better than to argue with the king when the king had decided. Tenali Rama was given a small room in a corner of the palace complex, a thin mattress on a stone floor, a bowl of rice and dal for his dinner. It was not much. It was more than he had had in a long time. It was a beginning. The days that followed were difficult. The poets did not welcome him. They ignored him when they could, mocked him when they could not, watched him with suspicion at all times. He was an outsider. He did not speak the way they spoke, dress the way they dressed, bow the way they bowed. He did not flatter the king in the elaborate Sanskrit verses that the court poets specialized in. He spoke in Telugu, the language of the common people. His verses were short and sharp, and often funny. The poets considered this beneath them. Poetry, they believed, should be serious. Learned, difficult, a poem that made people laugh was not a poem at all. It was a joke. Jokes had no place in the court of a great king. The king did not agree. Krishnadevaraya was a man of many tastes. He loved the serious verses of Timurusu, the long, complex poems that explored the nature of duty and love and death. He also loved to laugh. Tenali Rama made him laugh. Not with crude jokes or simple wordplay, with something deeper. The stories he told had edges. They made the king think even as he laughed. They made him see things he had not seen before, the gap between his intentions and his actions, the distance between the ideal of a just king and the reality of a man who was tired and overworked and sometimes wrong. Tenali Rama's wit was not a weapon. It was a mirror. Krishnadevaraya, to his credit, was willing to look into that mirror and see what was there. The first great test came after several weeks. The king had been listening to a long discourse from a visiting scholar, a man who claimed to have mastered all the scriptures and all the philosophies and all the arts. The scholar spoke for hours, his voice droning on and on, his arguments circling back on themselves, his conclusions less interesting than his assumptions. The court listened politely, because the scholar was famous and had travelled far and could not be dismissed. The king was bored. Everyone could see it. His eyes had grown distant, his attention wandering. He was thinking about something else: the harvest, the war in the north, the repairs needed on a temple roof, anything other than the endless, tedious discourse of the visiting scholar. Tenali Rama spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not interrupt. He leaned forward and said, in a tone of gentle curiosity, "Forgive me, great scholar. I have a question." The scholar stopped. He looked at this thin man in simple clothes, this nobody who had dared to interrupt him. His expression was one of barely concealed contempt. "Yes," he said. "What is your question?" Tenali Rama smiled. "You have been speaking for many hours about the nature of truth. You have told us what the Vedas say, what the Upanishads say, what the great teachers of the past have said. I am a simple man, and I am confused. Tell me, if a man is standing in a river, and the river is flowing, and he is thirsty, where should he look for water?" The scholar blinked. The question was absurd. The answer was obvious. He should look down, the scholar said. The water is all around him. Tenali Rama nodded. Then why have you been looking up for so long? A moment of silence. Then the king laughed. The court laughed. Even some of the poets laughed, though they tried to hide it behind their hands. The scholar's face turned red. He had been outwitted, not by argument, but by a story. Not by logic, but by a simple image that cut through all his learned nonsense. He gathered his scrolls and left, muttering about the decline of civilized discourse. Krishnadevaraya looked at Tenali Rama with something like wonder. You have done in one sentence what the scholar could not do in 1,000. You have told the truth, without seeming to tell it. You have made me laugh and think at the same time. That is a rare gift. He paused. I am going to give you a title. From this day forward, you shall be known as Vijayanagara, the jester poet. You will speak when others are silent. You will laugh when others are serious. You will remind me, always, that I am a man before I am a king. Tenali Rama bowed his head. Not in submission, in gratitude. The goddess had given him 2 bowls, and he had taken them both. In the court of the greatest king in South India, he was beginning to understand what that meant. He was not the wisest man in the room. He was not the funniest. He was something rarer. A man who knew that wisdom and laughter belonged together. That a king who could not laugh at himself had already lost his kingdom, whether he knew it or not. The title of Vijayanagara was not merely an honour, it was a responsibility. Tenali Rama understood from the beginning that his role in the court was different from that of the other poets. They were there to praise the king, to celebrate his victories, to compose verses that would be carved into stone and recited at festivals for generations to come. He was there to do something else, something more delicate. He was there to tell the truth. Not all the truth. The whole truth would break any court, any king, any human heart. A certain kind of truth. The kind that could be spoken only through laughter. The kind that could be heard only when the listener was not bracing himself against it. The kind that could change a mind without the mind ever noticing that it had been changed. This was the art he had been practicing since childhood. The art he had perfected during his long years of wandering. The art that the goddess had blessed when she allowed him to take both bowls. He was not a reformer, not a revolutionary. He did not seek to overthrow the king or undermine the kingdom. He loved Krishnadevaraya. He admired the king's intelligence, his curiosity, his genuine desire to rule justly. He also knew that power corrupts in small ways, not large ones. A king does not wake up one morning and decide to become a tyrant. He becomes a tyrant slowly, through 1,000 small decisions, each one justified, each one reasonable, each one moving him a little further from the people he was meant to serve. Tenali Rama's job, his sacred duty, as he saw it, was to interrupt that process, to insert a moment of laughter into the machinery of power, to remind the king, again and again, that he was human. The stories that follow are the ones that have survived. Told and retold for 5 centuries, passed down through generations of parents and grandparents, through the oral traditions of South India, through the written collections that preserved them for posterity. Some of them are true, some are invented, most are a little of both. It does not matter. The truth of a story is not in its facts, it is in its effect on the listener. These stories, if you let them wash over you without grasping, without analysing, without trying to remember, will do what they have always done. They will quiet the mind, soften the heart, carry you gently towards sleep. The first of the great tales is the story of the pot of gold. It begins on an ordinary morning in the court of Krishnadevaraya. The king sat on his throne. The courtiers arranged around him in their usual places. The air was warm, as it always was. The sound of the fountain came through the open archway, soft and steady. A Brahmin had come to the court with a complaint. He was an old man, thin and dignified, with the look of someone who had spent his life in study and prayer. He stood before the king with his hands folded and his head bowed. He told his story in a voice that trembled slightly with age and emotion. He had found a pot of gold, he said, buried in his field beneath an old banyan tree. The pot was large and heavy, filled with gold coins that had been hidden there, perhaps by some merchant fleeing an invasion, perhaps by some king hiding his treasure from his enemies. The Brahmin did not know. He knew that the gold was not his. He had not earned it. He had not inherited it. He had simply stumbled upon it, and now he did not know what to do. The law said that treasure found in the ground belonged to the king. The Dharma said that a man should not keep what he had not earned. The Brahmin was poor, and his children were hungry, and the gold sat in his house like a question he could not answer. He had come to the king, hoping for guidance. Krishnadevaraya listened carefully. He was a just king, and he wanted to make the right decision. The law was clear. Treasure belonged to the throne. That was the ancient rule, followed for centuries. He opened his mouth to speak, to tell the Brahmin that the gold must be surrendered to the royal treasury. Then he caught Tenali Rama's eye. The jester poet was standing at the edge of the court, leaning against a pillar, his expression one of mild interest. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply raised one eyebrow, very slightly, and smiled. The king paused. He had learned to recognize that smile. It meant there was something he had not considered. "Vikata Kavi," the king said. "You have been silent for a long time. What do you think?" Tenali Rama pushed himself off the pillar and walked slowly into the center of the court. He bowed to the king, nodded to the Brahmin, looked around at the assembled courtiers with an expression of thoughtful concern. "A difficult question, Your Majesty. The law is clear. The Dharma is not always the same as the law. The law says the gold belongs to the king. The Dharma says that a man who finds treasure should use it for good works. The Brahmin is poor. His children are hungry. Perhaps the gods buried that gold in his field for a reason." The king frowned. He did not like it when the law and the Dharma disagreed. He was a man who wanted things simple, clear, certain. Tenali Rama was always introducing complications, pointing out exceptions, reminding him that the world was messier than any law could capture. "Then what would you have me do? Give him the gold? Set a precedent that every peasant who finds a pot of coins can keep it, regardless of the law?" Tenali Rama shook his head. "No, Your Majesty, I would not have you give him the gold. The law is the law, and a king who ignores the law is no king at all. I would also not have you take it. The man is poor, and his need is real, and a king who ignores the suffering of his people is no king either. Perhaps there is a third way." The king leaned forward. "What third way?" Tenali Rama smiled. "Let the Brahmin keep the gold. Let him use it to feed the poor of his village, to repair the temple, to support the scholars who study the scriptures. The gold will be spent on good works, which benefits the kingdom. The Brahmin will not become wealthy from treasure he did not earn, which satisfies the Dharma. The king will have shown mercy without breaking the law. Even the gods, I think, will be pleased." The king was silent for a long time. The court held its breath. The fountain murmured in the courtyard, soft and steady. Krishnadevaraya nodded. "So be it. The Brahmin shall keep the gold. He shall use it for good works, under the supervision of the temple priests. Let it be recorded that this decision was made, not because the law is wrong, but because mercy is sometimes greater than the law." The Brahmin fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He blessed the king and the jester poet and everyone in the room. Tenali Rama stepped back to his place by the pillar, his expression unchanged, as if he had done nothing more remarkable than suggest a different route for the morning walk. The king was watching him. He understood that he had just learned something important. Not about the law, about mercy, about the difference between ruling and governing. The second great tale is simpler, lighter, the kind of story that makes children laugh and adults remember what it felt like to be young. It begins with a dispute between two farmers, each of whom claimed to own the same mango tree. The tree grew on the boundary between their fields, its trunk straddling the invisible line that separated one man's land from the other's. For years they had shared the fruit, each taking the mangoes that fell on his side of the line. That year, the harvest had been poor, the mangoes few, and the two farmers had begun to argue. The argument grew heated, words were exchanged, threats were made. Unable to resolve the dispute themselves, they brought their case to the king. Krishnadevaraya listened to both men. Their stories were identical, except for the one detail that mattered. Each claimed that the tree had been planted by his grandfather, that his family had tended it for generations, that the other man's claim was a lie invented to steal what was not rightfully his. The king frowned. There was no evidence, no witnesses. One man's word against another's. He could split the difference, declare that the tree belonged to both of them, as it always had. That solution had already failed. The two men were no longer willing to share. They wanted a winner and a loser. Justice, not compromise. The king looked at Tenali Rama, who was lounging against a pillar as usual, his eyes half closed, as if he were about to fall asleep. Vikatakavi, you have been listening. What do you suggest? Tenali Rama opened his eyes and yawned. A performance, of course. Everything Tenali Rama did was a performance, but the yawn was so convincing that several courtiers found themselves yawning in response. A difficult problem, Your Majesty. The tree cannot be cut in half, like Solomon's baby. The two men cannot be made to love each other, no matter how many laws you pass. Perhaps we need a different approach. The king waited, the court waited, the two farmers waited. The fountain murmured in the courtyard, soft and steady. Your Majesty, do you like mangoes? The king blinked. Of course I like mangoes. Everyone likes mangoes. Tenali Rama nodded. Then perhaps you should eat this one. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a mango, a single, perfect golden mango that seemed to glow in the morning light. The two farmers stared. Where had the mango come from? They had brought no mangoes to court. The king stared. He had not seen Tenali Rama pick any fruit from the tree. There it was, in the jester poet's hand, as real as the throne he sat on. This mango was grown on the tree in question. I picked it this morning, before the court convened. It is the first fruit of the season, the sweetest and the best. I am going to give it to someone in this room, not to the king, not to the farmers, to someone else, someone who will teach us all something about justice. He looked around the court. His eyes passed over the ministers, the generals, the poets, the priests. They passed over the two farmers, whose faces were tight with anticipation. They settled on a small child, the daughter of one of the palace servants, who had wandered into the court by accident and was standing near the door with her thumb in her mouth and her eyes wide with wonder. You, come here, little one. The child looked at her mother, who nodded nervously. She walked forward, her bare feet silent on the polished stone, and stopped in front of the jester poet. Tenali Rama knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers. He held out the mango. This is for you. Eat it. Enjoy it. Remember, the best fruit is the one that is shared, not the one that is fought over. The child took the mango. She looked at it. She looked at Tenali Rama. She looked at the king. She bit into it. Juice ran down her chin. She smiled. The two farmers looked at each other. Their anger had not disappeared, but something had shifted. They had been fighting over a tree that belonged to neither of them. In a sense, a tree that gave its fruit to the world, not to its owners. The jester poet had given the first fruit to a child, not because the child deserved it, but because the child would enjoy it, without claiming it, without fighting over it, without turning it into a weapon. The farmers understood that their dispute was not about mangoes, it was about pride. Pride was a poor substitute for sweetness. They left the court together, still not friends, but no longer enemies. The tree continued to bear fruit for many years. The fruit was shared. No one fought over it again. The third tale is darker, quieter, the kind of story that settles into the bones like a cool mist on a hot day. The story of the weeping sage. The sage was old, very old, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He came to the court of Krishnadevaraya not with a complaint or a request, but with a question. He stood before the king, his thin body swaying slightly. He wept, not loudly, not dramatically. He wept the way rain falls on dry earth, steadily, quietly, without expectation. The king was disturbed. He had seen many things in his years on the throne. He had never seen a sage weep. Sages were supposed to be beyond such things. They had transcended attachment, desire, sorrow. Yet here was this old man, this holy man, this person who had spent his life in meditation and prayer, standing in the royal court with tears running down his cheeks. "What troubles you, Holy One? Why do you weep?" The sage raised his eyes to the king's face. His voice was thin and reedy, like wind through dry grass. "I weep, Your Majesty, because I have lost something precious. Something I cannot find. Something that was taken from me, or perhaps I gave it away, or perhaps it simply left. I do not know. I know that it is gone, and I am old, and I do not have much time left to find it." The king leaned forward. "What did you lose? Tell me. I will send my soldiers to search for it, messengers, to every corner of the empire. I will offer a reward. Whatever it takes, I will help you find what you have lost." The sage shook his head. "You cannot find it with soldiers, not with messengers or rewards. What I have lost is not a thing, not gold or silver or jewels, not a scroll or a relic or a sacred text. What I have lost," he paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "What I have lost is my laughter. I used to laugh. I used to see the humour in things, the absurdity, the gentle joke that the world is always telling. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how. I became serious, heavy, the kind of sage that people expect me to be, always wise and never foolish, always right and never wrong. In becoming that person, I lost something essential. I lost the part of me that could laugh at myself, at the world, at the whole ridiculous pageant of existence. Now I am old, and I am tired, and I cannot remember how to find my way back." The king was silent. He looked around the court, at the ministers and generals and poets and priests, all of them serious, all of them heavy, all of them wearing the masks that their positions required. He looked at himself, sitting on his golden throne with his pearl necklace and his small gold crown. He wondered when he had last laughed, really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from the belly, that makes the eyes water and the sides ache, that leaves you breathless and light, and somehow more yourself than you were before. He could not remember. Perhaps it had been years, perhaps decades. Perhaps he had never laughed that way at all, not since he was a child, not since before he became a king. "Fakatakavi," the king said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "The sage has lost his laughter. Can you help him find it?" Tenali Rama stepped forward. He looked at the weeping sage, at the tears still running down his cheeks, at the weight of years and wisdom and sorrow that bent his shoulders. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, right there in front of the throne. He looked up at the sage and smiled. Not a clever smile, not a mocking smile, a simple, open, childlike smile. "Tell me a joke," he said. The sage blinked. "What? Tell me a joke. Any joke. The worst joke you know, the stupidest joke, the kind of joke that makes children laugh and adults groan. Tell me one. Please." The sage stared at him. The court stared at him. The king stared at him. Tenali Rama sat there, smiling, waiting. After a long moment, the sage spoke. His voice was uncertain at first, hesitant, as if he were trying to remember a language he had not spoken in years. He told a joke. It was a terrible joke. The kind of joke that is not funny at all. That makes no sense. That ends with a punchline that lands like a stone dropped into still water. The court was silent. No one laughed. Tenali Rama laughed. Not politely, not performatively. He laughed the way a child laughs, openly, freely, without self-consciousness. His laughter filled the hall, echoed off the granite pillars, mingled with the sound of the fountain. Something in the sage's face shifted. A muscle relaxed, a line softened. Very slowly, very quietly, the sage began to laugh too. A small laugh at first, tentative, as if he were testing a limb that had been broken and was just beginning to heal. Then a larger laugh, stronger, surer. Then a great, rolling, helpless laugh that bent him double and brought tears to his eyes, not tears of sorrow this time, but tears of release. The court watched in amazement. The king watched in wonder. Tenali Rama sat on the floor, laughing with the sage, laughing at nothing and everything, laughing at the absurdity of a world where a man could forget how to laugh. When the laughter finally subsided, the sage wiped his eyes and looked at the jester poet with profound gratitude. Thank you. I had forgotten. Laughter is not something you find. It is something you choose. Every moment, every breath. You choose to see the world as a tragedy or a comedy, and both are true, and the choice is yours. He bowed to Tenali Rama, bowed to the king, walked out of the court with a lightness in his step that had not been there when he arrived. The king watched him go. He turned to Tenali Rama. You have done more for that man than all the philosophers in my kingdom. How did you know what to do? Tenali Rama shrugged. I didn't, Your Majesty. I just sat down and asked for a joke. Sometimes the simplest thing is the right thing, and sometimes the person who seems to have all the answers is the one who has forgotten the question. The stories continued, one after another, like waves on a shore. The tale of the greedy merchant who tried to cheat the king and was undone by his own words turned back on him like a boomerang of truth. The tale of the courtier who tried to embarrass Tenali Rama in front of the entire court and found himself embarrassed instead, his own cleverness used against him with a gentleness that somehow made the defeat worse. The tale of the foreign ambassador who came to Vijayanagara with a challenge, a riddle that none of the court scholars could solve, and Tenali Rama solved it by not solving it, by answering the question with a question, by revealing that the ambassador's riddle was based on a false assumption and therefore had no answer at all. Each tale was different, but they all shared the same shape. Someone was wrong. Someone had power. Someone needed to learn something that they could not be told directly. Tenali Rama, with a story or a joke or a seemingly simple question, taught them. Not by lecturing, not by arguing, by inviting them to see the world differently, just for a moment, just long enough to recognize their own reflection in the water. And the king watched. And the king learned. Not everything. No one learns everything. But enough. Enough to become a better ruler than he would have been without the jester poet at his side. Enough to remember, in moments of pride or anger or weariness, that he was human, and that humans are funny creatures, and that the best way to govern them was not with force, but with understanding. Enough to love Tenali Rama, not despite his jokes, but because of them. The king and the jester poet became something rare in the annals of history. They became friends. Not the kind of friends who agree about everything, the kind who trust each other enough to disagree. The kind who know that the other person's laugh is a gift, and that a well-told story can do what armies cannot. The kind who understand that the bond between them is stronger than any law, any treaty, any crown. But not everyone in the court was pleased. The other poets, The ones who had spent years climbing the ladder of favour watched Tenali Rama with eyes that burned with envy. They had worked so hard, composed so many verses, flattered the king so skillfully. This thin man from a forgotten village, this nobody who told jokes instead of writing epics, this creature who laughed at things that should have been treated with solemn respect, he had taken something that should have been theirs. The king's ear, the king's affection, the king's trust. They wanted it back. They were willing to do almost anything to get it. The plots began quietly, a whispered word here, an insinuation there, a suggestion that the jester poet was not sufficiently respectful of tradition, a hint that his jokes sometimes crossed the line into mockery, a rumour that he had been heard speaking disrespectfully of the king when the king was not present. None of it was true. Truth in a court is a flexible thing. It bends to fit the needs of those who wield it. The poets were skilled at bending. They had been practicing for years. They knew exactly which words to whisper and which ears to whisper them into. They knew how to plant a seed of doubt and water it with suspicion until it grew into something that could not be ignored. The first serious plot involved a forgery. One of the poets, his name has been lost to history, which is perhaps a kindness, composed a letter in Tenali Rama's name. The letter was addressed to a rival king, an enemy of Vijayanagara, promising to deliver the secrets of the palace in exchange for gold. The handwriting was carefully copied. The phrasing was exactly the kind of thing Tenali Rama might have written. Clever, ironic, just disrespectful enough to be believable. The poet placed the letter where it would be found, then waited. When the letter was discovered and brought to the king, the court was thrown into an uproar. Treason, betrayal, the jester poet, the king's favourite, had been selling secrets to the enemy. The ministers demanded that Tenali Rama be arrested, tortured, executed. The poets nodded solemnly, their faces masks of righteous indignation. This was their moment. This was the end. The king read the letter in silence. His face was unreadable. He looked at the handwriting, the phrasing, the seal pressed into the wax at the bottom. He looked at Tenali Rama, who was standing at the edge of the court, leaning against his usual pillar, his expression one of mild curiosity. Vikatakavi, this letter was found in your quarters. It appears to be written in your hand. What do you have to say? Tenali Rama walked slowly to the centre of the court. He did not look frightened. He did not look angry. He looked, if anything, a little bored. He took the letter from the king's hand and examined it carefully, holding it up to the light, studying the ink, the paper, the seal. The court held its breath. The poets smiled behind their hands. This is a very good forgery, Tenali Rama said finally. Almost good enough to fool me. Not quite. Look here, Your Majesty. He pointed to a small imperfection in the seal. My seal has a tiny flaw, a scratch on the left side of the lotus petal. I put it there myself, years ago, so that I would always be able to tell the real from the fake. This seal has no scratch. It is a copy, and not a perfect one. He pointed to the handwriting. I never dot my ra in this way. I dot it from the right, not the left. A small thing, but consistent. The person who wrote this letter did not know me well enough to know my habits. He pointed to the phrasing. I would never promise to deliver secrets within the month of Margashirsha. I do not think in terms of months. I think in terms of stories. A real letter from me would have said something like, when the river rises, or after the next festival. This is the work of someone who thinks like a clerk, not a storyteller. The king nodded slowly. He looked at the poets, at their suddenly uncertain faces, at the way they shifted on their cushions and avoided his eyes. Then who wrote this letter? Tenali Rama shrugged. I do not know, Your Majesty. I know how to find out." He turned to face the court. His voice was calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had all the time in the world. "The person who wrote this letter knows how to write, has access to paper and ink and sealing wax, knows where my quarters are and how to enter them without being seen, has a reason to want me disgraced." That describes almost everyone in this room. It also describes someone who made a mistake. The ink used in this letter is not ordinary ink. It is a special ink, made from a recipe known only to a few. I recognize the smell. It is the ink that the court poets use for their official compositions. The ink that comes from the royal stores. The ink kept in a locked cabinet, to which only a handful of people have the key. He looked at the chief poet, Timurusu. The old man's face had gone pale. His hands were trembling. He opened his mouth to speak. No words came out. Tenali Rama did not accuse him. He did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The king looked at Timurusu, his expression one of disappointment rather than anger. Disappointment was worse. Anger could be met with defiance. Disappointment could only be met with shame. Timurusu bowed his head. He did not deny it. He could not. The truth was written on his face as clearly as the forgery was written on the paper. The king was silent for a long time. The fountain murmured in the courtyard. When he spoke, his voice was soft and tired. "Timurusu, you have served me for many years, composed many beautiful verses, been a credit to this court and this kingdom. You have also tried to destroy a man who never wronged you, simply because you were jealous of his place in my affections. I cannot punish you as you deserve, because I am grateful for your years of service. I can no longer trust you. Go back to your house. Stay there. Do not return to this court until I send for you." Timurusu rose on shaking legs. He bowed to the king, bowed to Tenali Rama, walked out of the hall with the slow, heavy steps of a man who had just lost everything that mattered. The other poets watched him go. They were afraid. They had seen what happened to those who plotted against the jester poet. They had learned that Tenali Rama did not need to fight back. He only needed to tell the truth. The truth, spoken quietly and without malice, was more powerful than any lie. They did not give up. Envy is a hunger that cannot be satisfied, a thirst that cannot be quenched. They tried again, and again, and again. Each time, a new plot. Each time, they were certain that this would be the one that finally brought him down. Each time, Tenali Rama unravelled their schemes with the same calm, unhurried intelligence, the same gentle wit, the same refusal to be drawn into anger or revenge. He did not hate the poets. He did not even dislike them. He pitied them, a little, the way one pities a dog that has been beaten too often and now snaps at every passing hand. They were trapped in their own envy, unable to see that the thing they wanted, the king's favour, could not be taken from someone else. It had to be earned. They had forgotten how to earn anything, because they had spent so many years learning how to take. The most famous of the poet's plots is the story of the cats and the ghee. Children in South India still hear it from their grandparents, told so many times that it is worn smooth as river stone. The plot was simple, which made it elegant. The poets acquired 2 cats, identical cats, from the same litter, same colour, same size, same everything. They trained the cats carefully over many weeks, teaching them to respond to certain commands. On a day when the king was in a particularly good mood, they brought the cats to court. The king loved animals. He was delighted. He asked the poets where they had found such beautiful creatures. The poets smiled and said the cats were a gift, a humble offering, a small token of their esteem. There was more to come. The poets had also brought a pot of ghee, clarified butter, golden and fragrant, the kind used in temple offerings and royal feasts. They placed the pot in the centre of the court. They set the 2 cats on either side of it. Then, They waited. The cats, trained as they were, did exactly what they had been taught. One cat walked to the pot and began to lap up the ghee. The other cat sat still, its eyes fixed on its trainer, waiting for a command that did not come. The poets turned to the king. "Your Majesty, you see before you a mystery. These two cats are identical, raised together. They have eaten the same food and drunk the same water and slept in the same basket. Yet one of them is greedy, it eats the ghee without being asked, while the other is disciplined, it waits for permission. How can this be? What makes one cat different from the other?" The king frowned. He did not see where this was going. The poets were not finished. "The difference, Your Majesty, is training. One cat was trained to obey, the other was not. The same is true of men. Some men are trained to be loyal, disciplined, respectful. Others, they looked at Tenali Rama. Others are trained to be clever at the expense of everything else. They make us laugh, yes. Can they be trusted? Can they be relied upon? Will their cleverness eventually turn against the very hand that feeds them?" The king's frown deepened. He looked at Tenali Rama, who was watching the cats with an expression of genuine interest. The jester poet seemed not to have noticed that he was the subject of the poet's attack. He was looking at the cats the way a child looks at a new toy, curious, engaged, slightly amused. "Pakatakavi, what do you make of this?" Tenali Rama walked over to the cats. He knelt down beside the pot of ghee, his knees creaking slightly. He studied the two animals with the same careful attention he gave to everything. He reached out and scratched the ear of the cat that had eaten the ghee. The cat purred. He scratched the ear of the cat that had not eaten. It did not purr. It sat still, waiting, its eyes fixed on its trainer. Tenali Rama stood up and brushed off his knees. "A very interesting demonstration, Your Majesty. I think the poets have misunderstood what it means." The poets bristled. They had not misunderstood anything. The trap was set. The jester poet was about to walk into it. "Tell me," Tenali Rama said, turning to the poets. "Which of these two cats would you trust to catch a mouse?" The poets blinked. They had not considered that question. "The one that ate the ghee is greedy," one of them said. "It would probably eat the mouse instead of catching it." Tenali Rama nodded. "And the other? The one that waits for permission?" the poets considered. "That cat is disciplined. It would follow orders. It would catch the mouse and bring it to its master." Tenali Rama smiled. "So you would trust the disciplined cat over the greedy one? You would prefer obedience to initiative? You would choose the cat that waits to be told what to do, rather than the cat that acts on its own?" The poets nodded. That was exactly what they meant. That was the whole point. "Then you have just explained why the king needs me. You are the disciplined cats. You wait to be told what to do. You follow orders. You never step out of line. That is useful, in its way. When there is a mouse in the kitchen, a problem that no one has anticipated, a threat that comes from an unexpected direction, you will still be sitting there, waiting for permission. I will have already caught the mouse. Not because I am greedy, because I am hungry. Hungry for the truth, hungry for justice, hungry to serve the king in ways that no one has thought to ask for." He turned to the king. "Your Majesty, these poets want you to believe that obedience is the highest virtue. Obedience without intelligence is just machinery. You are not the kind of king who wants to be surrounded by machinery. You want to be surrounded by people. Even the messy ones. Even the ones who eat the ghee when no one is looking." The king laughed. The poets did not. They had been outsmarted again, and the knowledge tasted bitter in their mouths. The cats had lost interest in the whole affair. One was licking its paw. The other was still sitting, waiting, its eyes fixed on its trainer with an intensity that was almost painful to see. Tenali Rama reached down and picked up the disciplined cat. He held it in his arms, cradling it like a baby, stroking its head until it began to purr. "Good cat. You have been trained well. Perhaps it is time to teach you something new, that the world does not end where your training ends, that you can think for yourself." He set the cat down. It looked at him, then at its trainer, then back at him. Very slowly, it walked over to the pot of ghee and took a tentative lick. The poets gasped. The king laughed again. Tenali Rama smiled his quiet, calm smile. "There, now both cats know how to be cats. That, Your Majesty, is more important than any lesson in obedience." The poets never recovered from that defeat. They continued to scheme. Envy does not die easily, but their schemes grew weaker, more desperate, more obviously the work of men who had lost confidence in their own abilities. Tenali Rama did not gloat. He did not mock them. He did not even seem to notice them most of the time. He went about his business, telling stories, making the king laugh, quietly correcting the small injustices that crept into the administration of the empire. The poets watched him with a mixture of hatred and grudging admiration. He was what they could never be, not because he was smarter, though he was, but because he was free. Free from the need to impress, free from the fear of falling, free from the small, cramped ambitions that had turned them into disciplined cats, waiting for permission, while the mice ran free in the kitchen. The king was changing. The friendship between Krishnadevaraya and Tenali Rama deepened with each passing season. Each shared meal, each quiet conversation in the evening, when the court had dispersed and the palace was still. They talked about everything. The king talked about the burden of rule, the endless decisions, the impossible expectations, the knowledge that every choice would please some and anger others, that there was no way to know in the moment which was which. Tenali Rama listened. He did not offer solutions. He offered stories about other kings who had faced similar dilemmas, other rulers who had made similar choices, other men who had learned, too late or just in time, that power is a loan, not a gift. The stories did not tell the king what to do. They reminded him that he was not alone, that others had walked this path before him, that the weight he carried was heavy, yes, but not infinite, that even the heaviest burden is easier to bear when someone is walking beside you. The king talked about his fears, failing his people, being remembered as a tyrant, or worse, as someone who did nothing. The wars that seemed to come no matter how hard he worked for peace, the famines that no amount of preparation could prevent, the simple, ordinary cruelty of a world that did not care about his plans or his prayers. Tenali Rama listened. He did not tell the king that his fears were foolish. He did not tell him to be brave. He told him a story about a farmer who spent his whole life worrying about the weather. The weather came anyway. The farmer learned eventually that worrying is not the same as preparing. Preparing is useful. Worrying is just a story you tell yourself. A story that makes you feel busy without actually doing anything. The king laughed at the story, then was quiet. "You are right. I have been worrying instead of preparing. Telling myself stories about how bad things could be instead of doing the things that would make them better." Tenali Rama nodded. That is what friends are for, to remind us of the difference between useful fear and useless fear. One helps us survive, the other just keeps us awake at night. The friendship was not always easy. There were disagreements, moments when the king's pride was wounded by some gentle joke, some pointed observation, some reminder that he was not as wise or as good or as beloved as he believed himself to be. Moments when Tenali Rama pushed too far, said too much, forgot that even a friend must sometimes bow. They always found their way back to each other. Beneath the jokes and the stories and the clever wordplay, something real lived, a genuine affection, a mutual respect, a recognition that each needed the other. The king needed someone who would tell him the truth, and Tenali Rama needed someone who would listen. an unlikely pair, a king and a jester, a ruler and a fool. The world is full of unlikely pairs, and some of them, the best of them, become the stories that outlast empires. The stories told to children at bedtime, in languages that have changed beyond recognition, in lands that the tellers have never seen. The stories that remind us, without ever saying it directly, that power without laughter is tyranny, and that laughter without love is cruelty, and that the best kind of friendship is the kind that holds both, gently, without dropping either. But the man who stood before the king, who traded riddles with scholars and outwitted jealous poets, was not only a courtier, he was also a husband, a father, a man who returned each evening to a small house on a quiet street where the lamp was lit and the rice was cooking, and a woman waited for him with the patient love of someone who had known him before he was famous. Her name was Sharada. She appears in the stories only rarely, a figure at the edge of the frame. Her presence is essential. She was the anchor, the still point. The person who reminded Tenali Rama every single day that he was not his wit, not his reputation, not the stories that people told about him, simply a man who snored in his sleep and left his sandals in the wrong place and forgot, sometimes, to bring home the vegetables she had asked for. She loved him. That love, quiet and ordinary and utterly reliable, was the ground beneath his feet. Their home was not grand. Tenali Rama had been offered larger quarters, finer furniture, more servants. He had declined. He liked the small house with its mud walls and its palm leaf roof, the house that reminded him of Thalluru, of his mother, of the village where he had learned to listen before he learned to speak. The house had 2 rooms, one for cooking and eating, one for sleeping. A small courtyard in the back, where Sharada grew herbs and flowers. A banyan tree at the gate, old and wide, its roots descending from the branches like the fingers of a sleeping god. Not much. Enough. Tenali Rama, who had slept in fields and temple courtyards and the cold stone floors of strangers' houses, knew the value of enough. The stories of his home life are gentle stories, small stories, the kind that do not get carved into temple walls or recited at festivals. The stories that mothers tell their children, that families tell each other across the dinner table, that hold no drama and no lesson and no moral, except that love is made of small things. There is the story of the time Tenali Rama came home with a new verse in his head, so absorbed in the rhythm and the sound that he walked straight into the doorframe and gave himself a bruise on his forehead. Sharada laughed at him, not cruelly, pressed a cool cloth to the swelling, told him that perhaps next time he should look where he was going. He promised to try. He forgot. He walked into the same doorframe 3 days later. She laughed again. He laughed with her. They ate their dinner in the warm light of the oil lamp. The world outside, the court, the kingdom, the endless demands of power, seemed very far away. There is the story of their son, a boy whose name has been lost, but whose presence lingers in the quiet spaces of the tales. The boy was clever, as his father's son should be, but not in the same way. He did not have Tenali Rama's sharpness, his speed, his gift for the cutting phrase. He had something softer, a gentleness, a way of looking at the world that made people want to protect him. Tenali Rama loved him with a fierceness that surprised him, a love that had nothing to do with wit or wisdom or any of the things that had defined his life. He would sit with the boy in the evenings, under the banyan tree, and tell him stories. Not the clever stories he told at court, the ones with twists and turns and unexpected punchlines. Simple stories. Old stories, the stories his mother had told him when he was small and his father had just died, and the world seemed like a dark place full of hungry things. The boy listened with his whole body, leaning against his father's chest, his eyes wide, his breath slow. Tenali Rama felt, in those moments, that he had finally found something worth all the years of wandering. Not fame, not favour, just this. A child, a tree, a story. The night settling around them like a blanket. But life is not only made of gentle moments. Loss, the stories do not dwell on it. The tellers of tales prefer laughter to tears. But it is there, beneath the surface, a dark current running through the bright water. Tenali Rama's mother died. He received the news in the court, in the middle of a joke. The joke died on his lips. The king saw his face change and dismissed the court early, without explanation. Tenali Rama walked home through the streets of Vijayanagara. The city that had always seemed so alive seemed suddenly empty. A stage with no actors, a story with no words. Sharada was waiting for him. She did not ask what had happened. She did not need to. She took his hand and led him to the courtyard where the banyan tree stood in the evening light. She sat with him in silence while the stars came out one by one. He did not cry. He had never been a man who cried easily. Something in him shifted that night. A foundation cracked and settled. He was not the same afterward. The wit was still there. The laughter was still there. Beneath them, deeper than them, a new note had appeared. A quietness. A recognition that time passes, and all the cleverness in the world cannot stop it. The softening of Tenali Rama's wit into wisdom did not happen all at once. It was a slow process, like the wearing down of a stone by water. Each year removed a sharp edge. Each loss smoothed a rough surface. The young man who had taken pleasure in embarrassing pompous scholars, who had used his cleverness as a weapon, who had been proud of his ability to cut and wound and leave others bleeding, that man was fading. In his place, a different man was emerging. He still told jokes, still made the king laugh, still outwitted his enemies. The jokes were gentler now. The laughter was warmer. The outwitting had become something closer to teaching. He did not want to destroy his enemies. He wanted to help them see. If they could not see, if they chose to remain blind, that was their choice. He was not responsible for their blindness. He was only responsible for his own sight. The story of the barber and the stolen gold marks this turning point. It is quieter than the earlier tales, less dramatic, less obviously clever. It best reveals the man Tenali Rama had become. A rich merchant had been robbed, a bag of gold coins taken from his house in the night. The merchant came to the king, weeping and wringing his hands, demanding justice. The king sent his soldiers to investigate. They found nothing. No broken locks, no forced entry, no footprints in the dust. The gold had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened and swallowed it. The merchant was distraught. He had been saving that gold for his daughter's wedding. The wedding was only a week away. Without the gold, no wedding. Without the wedding, his daughter's reputation would be ruined. Without her reputation, her life would be over. Or so he believed. The weight of his despair pressed down on everyone in the court like the heat before a storm. The king did not know what to do. His soldiers had failed. His spies had failed. The gold was gone, and the merchant's daughter would be disgraced, and there seemed to be no way to prevent it. He looked at Tenali Rama, not with expectation, but with something closer to hope. Fikata Kavi, you have solved many problems with your stories. Can you solve this one? Tenali Rama nodded slowly. He had been watching the merchant, studying his face, his hands, the way he held his body. Something was not right. He could not say what, exactly. The merchant's grief, while real, seemed to have an edge to it, a sharpness that did not belong to pure sorrow. Your Majesty, I will find your gold. I will need to do it in my own way. I will need to be alone with the merchant. I will need 3 days. The king agreed. He was willing to try anything. Tenali Rama took the merchant to a small room in the palace, a room with no windows and only one door. He closed the door. He sat down on the floor. He told the merchant a story. Not a clever story. Not a funny story. A sad story. The story of a man who had once stolen something small, something insignificant, and had been caught and punished and shamed. The story of how that shame had followed him for years, poisoned his relationships, turned him into someone he did not want to be. The story of how he had finally confessed, not because he was caught, but because he could no longer bear the weight of his own secret. The merchant listened. His face was pale. His hands were trembling. He did not speak. He did not need to. Tenali Rama was not telling the story to the merchant. He was telling the story to the part of the merchant that already knew the truth. The next day, Tenali Rama came back to the room. He sat down again. He told another story. This one was about a man who had stolen something large, something valuable, something that belonged to someone who trusted him. The man had not planned to steal it. It had been a moment of weakness, a temptation he had not been strong enough to resist. The moment had passed, and the thing was in his hands, and he did not know how to put it back. The shame was worse than he had imagined. It was eating him from the inside, consuming everything good that he had ever been. He wanted to confess. He wanted to return what he had taken. He was afraid of the punishment, afraid of the disgrace, afraid of what his family would think, what his neighbours would say, what would become of him when the truth came out. The merchant listened. He was crying now, silently, tears running down his cheeks and dripping onto his folded hands. The third day, Tenali Rama came to the room and found the gold. It was sitting in the middle of the floor, a small bag of coins, exactly as the merchant had described it. The merchant was not there. He had left in the night, unable to face the jester poet's eyes, unable to hear another story that was not really a story but a mirror. Tenali Rama picked up the bag. He carried it to the king. He did not tell the king who had taken the gold. He did not ask for an investigation. He did not demand punishment. He simply said, "Your Majesty, the gold has been returned. The merchant's daughter will have her wedding. Perhaps, somewhere in this city, a man who made a mistake is learning to forgive himself." The king looked at Tenali Rama with new eyes. "You know who took it?" Not a question. Tenali Rama nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. The gold is back. That is what matters. The rest is between the man and his conscience." The king was quiet for a long time. The fountain murmured in the courtyard. Somewhere in the palace, a child laughed. Krishnadevaraya understood that his jester poet had become something more than a wit. He had become a wise man, not the kind who sits on a mountaintop and speaks in riddles. The kind who walks through the world with his eyes open, who sees the good and the bad and the grey spaces in between, who knows that justice is not the same as punishment and that mercy is not the same as weakness. The kind who tells stories not to show off his cleverness, but to heal the wounds that cleverness alone cannot reach. The king looked at Tenali Rama and felt grateful. Not for the gold, not for the wedding, for the reminder that a king's greatest power is not the power to punish, it is the power to forgive. This is the Tenali Rama that the later stories remember. Not the sharp-tongued young man who embarrassed scholars for the pleasure of watching them squirm, not the clever courtier who outwitted poets with tricks and traps. The older man, the softer man, the man who had learned that wisdom is not the same as intelligence, that kindness is not the same as weakness. He still told jokes. He still made the king laugh. The jokes had a different flavour now. Gentler, wiser, more likely to end with a sigh than a punchline. He had learned, through the slow accumulation of years and losses, that the purpose of laughter is not to wound, it is to connect. to remind us that we are all in the same boat, all floating on the same dark river, all trying to find our way home. The best jokes, the ones that last, are the ones that make us feel less alone. There is a story about Tenali Rama in his later years, rarely told because it is not funny. Tender, almost sad, the kind of story that makes you want to sit quietly afterward and not say anything at all. The king had made a decision that Tenali Rama believed was wrong. Not a large decision, not the kind that would shape the fate of empires. A small decision, a personal decision, about a minor official accused of corruption. The king wanted to punish the man harshly, to make an example of him, to send a message that corruption would not be tolerated. Tenali Rama believed the man was innocent. Not entirely innocent. He had made mistakes, cut corners, taken small gifts that should have been refused. He had not stolen, he had not betrayed, guilty of weakness, not of evil. The king's punishment would destroy him. Tenali Rama went to the king. He did not argue, he did not present evidence. He did not make a clever joke that would reveal the king's error. He sat down on the floor of the king's private chamber, cross-legged, his back against the wall. He was quiet. The king waited. The king was busy. The king had 1,000 things to do. Tenali Rama did not move. He did not speak. He sat in silence, his eyes calm, his breath slow, his presence as steady and patient as the river outside the window. The king tried to ignore him. He could not. The silence was louder than any argument. Finally, after an hour, the king set down his pen. "What do you want?" His voice was tired, impatient. Tenali Rama looked at him. "Nothing, Your Majesty. I just wanted to sit with you." Sometimes the person who makes the decisions needs someone to sit with him. Not to advise, not to correct, just to be there, so that he does not feel alone. The king stared at him. He did not understand. Something in Tenali Rama's eyes, something soft and patient and infinitely kind, made him pause. He looked down at the papers on his desk. He looked at the punishment he had written out, the harsh words, the heavy fine. He read it again. Very slowly, he picked up his pen and crossed it out. He wrote a different punishment. A lighter one. A fine, yes, but a small one. A warning, yes, but a gentle one. A chance for the man to redeem himself, to learn from his mistakes, to become someone better. Not justice, not in the strict sense. Mercy, the king had learned from his jester poet, is sometimes the highest form of justice. He set down his pen. He looked at Tenali Rama. "Thank you." Tenali Rama shook his head. "Do not thank me, Your Majesty. Thank yourself. You crossed out the words. I just sat here. That is all I did. I sat here." The king nodded. He understood. What Tenali Rama had given him was not advice. It was presence. The simple, profound gift of another human being sitting beside him in silence, reminding him that he was not alone, that the weight of the crown did not have to be carried by one pair of shoulders. That was the gift. It was enough. But time passes, as it always does, slowly and without announcement. The river continues to move, the stars continue to turn. The people who once filled the world with their presence begin, one by one, to fade. The final years of Tenali Rama's life are not well documented. The chroniclers who recorded the deeds of kings and the victories of armies had little interest in the quiet death of a jester poet. He appears in the records less frequently, a shadow at the edge of the frame, a name mentioned in passing. The stories that survive from this period are fragmentary, incomplete, like memories that have been washed smooth by time. They are enough. They tell us that Tenali Rama grew old, as all men do, that his wit softened into something closer to silence, that he spent his final years in the small house on the quiet street, with Sharada and his son and the banyan tree at the gate. The king was aging too. Krishnadevaraya had ruled for decades, and the weight of those decades was visible in his face, in his shoulders, in the slow way he moved now, as if each step required a decision. The empire was still great, still powerful, still the envy of every kingdom in the south. The king was tired. The wars had taken their toll. The endless petitions, the endless disputes, the endless need for decisions that would please some and anger others, it had worn him down as it wears down every ruler who rules for long enough. He still laughed at Tenali Rama's jokes. The laughter was quieter now, shorter, more easily exhausted. Sometimes, when the jester poet looked at his friend, he saw something that made his heart ache. He saw the shadow of the end, the shape of a door that was slowly closing. There is a story about one of their last meeting. The king had fallen ill, not seriously, not yet, but enough to keep him in his chambers for several days. Tenali Rama came to visit him, as he always did. He found the king sitting by the window, looking out at the river. The light was golden, late afternoon, the time of day when everything seems to pause and hold its breath. The king did not turn when Tenali Rama entered. He continued to look at the river, at the water moving slowly through the granite gorge, at the temples on the far shore, at the clouds beginning to gather in the west. "Vakatakavi," the king said. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Do you think they will remember us?" Tenali Rama sat down beside him. He did not pretend to misunderstand the question. "Some of us. Not all. The world forgets most people. That is not cruelty. That is just the way of things. There are too many people and too few memories." The king nodded. He had known the answer before he asked. He had needed to hear it spoken aloud by someone he trusted. "And you? Will they remember you?" Tenali Rama was silent for a long time. The fountain murmured in the courtyard below. Somewhere in the palace, a child laughed. "Your Majesty, I do not know if they will remember my name. I think they will remember my stories. Stories have a way of surviving. They do not need names, they do not need dates. They just need someone to tell them, and someone to listen, and the quiet space between the telling and the listening where something true can live. My stories may outlast me, they may outlast you, they may outlast this empire and these stones and this river that we have loved for so long. That is enough. That is more than most people get." The king turned to look at him. His eyes were wet, though he would not admit it. "You are a strange man, Vakatakavi. You make me laugh when I want to cry. You make me think when I want to rest. You make me hope when I want to give up. I do not know what I would have been without you." Tenali Rama smiled. His smile was gentle now, not sharp, not clever. The smile of a man who had seen enough to know that smiles are precious and should not be wasted. "You would have been a good king, Your Majesty. You were a good king before I came, and you will be a good king after I am gone. I did not make you good, I just reminded you sometimes of the goodness that was already there. That is all anyone can do for anyone else. Remind them of what they already know, deep down in the place where the stories live." The historical records tell us that Krishnadevaraya died in 1529 after a long illness. He was in his late 50s, old for a king in those times, though young by the measure of the stories that would outlive him. His death marked the beginning of the end for the Vijayanagara Empire. The successors who followed him were not his equal. They lacked his wisdom, his patience, his love of learning. They fought among themselves, weakened the kingdom with their quarrels, opened the door to enemies who had been waiting for just such an opportunity. Within a few decades, the empire would begin to crumble. Within a century, the city of Vijayanagara would be abandoned, its temples and palaces left to the jungle, its stones reclaimed by the earth. The river would continue to flow. The granite hills would continue to stand. The city, the great city, the city of victory, would become a ghost. And Tenali Rama? The records are silent. Some say he died before the king, unable to imagine a world without his friend. Some say he outlived Krishnadevaraya by several years, wandering away from the court one morning and never returning, disappearing into the landscape like a story that has reached its end. Some say he returned to Thalluru, to the village of his birth, and lived out his final days under the same banyan tree where he had first learned to listen. The truth is not known. Perhaps it does not matter. A man who has become a story no longer needs a grave, no longer needs a date of birth or a date of death. He needs only to be told. And told again, in a different language, in a different century, on a different continent. To a listener drifting towards sleep who does not know the name of the man who first spoke the words. Because the stories did outlast him, that was the gift of the goddess, the gift he had chosen when he took both bowls. The stories travelled. They moved out of Vijayanagara on the lips of merchants and soldiers, of pilgrims and wandering monks, of anyone who had heard the jester poet speak and could not forget what they had heard. They crossed the mountains into the Tamil country, where they were told in a different language, with different details, the same shape. They crossed the rivers into the Telugu heartland, where Tenali Rama had been born, and there they found their most fertile ground. They travelled north into the Mughal Empire, where the name was forgotten but the stories remained, attached to other tricksters, other fools, other wise men who used laughter to tell the truth. They travelled south to the tip of the subcontinent, where the ocean meets the sky, and the stories seemed to dissolve into the salt air. They did not dissolve. They persisted. They found new tellers, new listeners, new moments of connection between one human heart and another. The story of the pot of gold became a story about mercy, about the difference between law and justice, about the small choices that make a kingdom worth living in. The story of the mango tree became a story about sharing, about the foolishness of fighting over things that belong to everyone and no one. The story of the weeping sage became a story about the importance of laughter, about the danger of taking ourselves too seriously, about the way that even the wisest among us can forget how to be human. The story of the cats and the ghee became a story about obedience and initiative, about the difference between machinery and life, about the value of people who think for themselves. The story of the barber and the stolen gold became a story about forgiveness, about second chances, about the possibility of becoming someone new even after making a terrible mistake. All of these stories, each in its own way, became a single story. The story of a man who held two bowls, wisdom and laughter, and refused to put either one down. The oral tradition preserved him. For 500 years, mothers have told his stories to their children at bedtime, in the soft light of oil lamps, in the quiet hour when the day's work is done and the night's dreams have not yet begun. Fathers have told his stories to their sons, not as lessons, but as gifts, the way you might pass down a tool or a piece of land or a song that your own father sang to you. Grandparents have told his stories to their grandchildren, and the grandchildren have grown up and told them to their own grandchildren, and the chain has never been broken. The names have changed, sometimes the details have shifted. The king is sometimes kinder, sometimes crueler, depending on who is telling the story and what lesson they want to teach. The shape remains. The shape of a man who was not afraid to laugh at power, who was not afraid to speak truth to the powerful, who was not afraid to be foolish in a world that values seriousness above almost everything else. There is a story about the end of Tenali Rama's life that is not found in any written source. It exists only in the oral tradition, passed down through generations of storytellers who have added their own touches, their own emphases, their own sense of what the ending should be. In his final days, Tenali Rama lay on a thin mattress in his small house. Sharada sat beside him. His son stood at the foot of the bed. The window was open, and the sound of the river came through it, soft and steady, the same sound he had heard all his life. The banyan tree at the gate cast its shadow across the floor, the shadow of roots descending from branches, the shadow of fingers reaching toward the earth. The lamp was burning low, the oil almost gone, the flame small and unsteady. Tenali Rama lay quietly and waited. His son asked him if he was afraid. The boy was a man now, grown and married and with children of his own. But in that moment, he was a child again, frightened of losing his father, frightened of the dark, frightened of the unknown. Tenali Rama looked at him. His eyes were pale now, the sharpness faded, but a small flame still burned in them. Afraid? No, I am not afraid. The goddess gave me 2 bowls, and I have carried them both. I have stumbled, but I have not fallen. I have laughed, and I have wept, and I have told the stories that needed to be told. That is enough, more than enough. He paused. The lamp flickered, the river murmured. He smiled, the same smile he had given the guards at the palace gate all those years ago, when he was young and hungry and full of hope. Do you know the best part? The story does not end with me. It ends with you, with whoever is listening, with whoever picks up the thread and keeps telling. That is the secret. That is the gift. The story is not mine. It never was. It belongs to anyone who needs it. He closed his eyes. The lamp flickered once more and went out. The room was dark, except for the pale light of the stars coming through the window. Sharada sat beside him, holding his hand. His son stood at the foot of the bed, not moving, barely breathing. Outside, the river continued to move, as it always had, as it always would, carrying everything gently forward. The story does not tell us what happened next. It does not need to. The ending is not the point. The point is the telling. The point is the listening. The point is the quiet space between the two, where something true can live. And now, let the story slow. Let it slow almost to stillness, like the river where it widens and deepens, where the current is barely felt and the surface is smooth as dark glass. The city of Vijayanagara is gone now. The empire is gone. The king is gone. The jester poet is gone. The place remains. The granite hills remain. The river remains. In the deep hours of the night, when the moon is set and the stars are at their brightest, something lingers. Not a ghost, not a memory, something softer. The echo of a story, the shape of a laugh, the feeling of a presence that has never quite left. Imagine yourself there now, if you can, without effort, without trying. Not a tourist, not a historian, a presence, a pair of eyes, a pair of ears, drifting above the landscape like smoke from a dying fire. Below, the Tungabhadra River moves through the darkness. The water is silver where the starlight touches it, black where the shadows of the hills fall across it. The sound is soft and steady, a hushing sound. The sound of something that has been saying the same thing for thousands of years, and will say it for thousands more. No hurry in that sound. No destination. The river simply moves, because moving is what rivers do. The sound of it is the oldest lullaby in the world, older than any story, older than any language, older than the first human ear that heard it and felt something shift inside. On either side of the river, the granite hills rise, dark against the darker sky, their outlines softened by distance, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and rain that have fallen for millennia. Some are shaped like animals, an elephant, a turtle, a serpent sleeping with its coils hidden beneath the earth. Some are shaped like nothing at all. Just rock. Just stone. just the bones of the earth pushing up through the skin of the soil. Between the hills, in the valleys and along the riverbanks, the ruins of the city rest. The temples, the palaces, the markets, the streets that once echoed with the sound of merchants and pilgrims, of soldiers and priests, of children laughing and women singing and men arguing about the price of grain. All of it's silent now. All of it still. The carved stones that once supported the roof of the Durbar Hall lie scattered across the ground like the bones of a giant. The Gopurams, the great temple towers, still stand, dark now, no lamps burning in their niches, no priests climbing their steps. They stand like sentinels who have forgotten what they were guarding, patient and silent and utterly still. The bazaar is empty. The stalls that once sold silk and spices, gold and pearls, are gone. The wooden carts that once carried rice and sugarcane have rotted away. The voices that once called out prices and bargained and laughed and argued have faded into the air, leaving nothing behind but the memory of sound. The ground where thousands of feet once walked is covered with dust and fallen leaves and the small, patient growth of plants that do not care about empires. A jackal moves through the shadows, its eyes glowing green in the starlight, its paws silent on the stone. It pauses, sniffs the air, moves on, disappearing between two fallen pillars, leaving no trace. The night is cool now, the heat of the day finally released, the air soft and damp with the promise of dawn. Somewhere, not far away, water drips from a crack in a temple wall, a slow, steady sound, like the ticking of a clock that measures something other than time. At the edge of the ruined city, near the river, near the banyan tree that has grown old and wide and full of shadows, there is a small house. Not a palace, not a temple, a simple house with mud walls and a palm leaf roof, the kind of house a farmer might have lived in, or a potter or a weaver. This house is different. This house has a story. Because in this house, once, a lamp burned late into the night. A lamp lit by a woman named Sharada, who waited for her husband to come home from the court. A lamp that cast its warm light on a man who sat cross-legged on the floor, telling stories to a boy who leaned against his chest. The lamp is gone now. The house is gone. Something remains. A feeling. A warmth. The sense that here, in this ordinary place, something extraordinary happened. Not a miracle. Not a divine intervention. Just a man, a woman, a child, and the stories that passed between them like bread broken and shared. The night deepens. The stars turn slowly overhead. The same stars that Tenali Rama watched when he was young and hungry and sleeping under banyan trees. They have not changed. They do not change. The fixed points in a world of motion, the candles that burn without oil, the witnesses that never speak. The river continues to move, silver and slow, carrying the reflections of the stars downstream, carrying the silence of the hills, carrying the memory of all the people who have stood on its banks and wondered where the water was going. Somewhere, in a ruined temple, a night bird calls. The sound is lonely and sweet, a single note held for a long moment, fading into the darkness. Another bird answers from across the river. The same note, or a different one, it is hard to tell. Silence, the river. The soft, distant sound of wind moving through the grass that grows between the stones. The storyteller's voice is fading now. It has been fading for a long time, growing softer and more distant with each passing sentence, each passing breath. Soon it will be gone entirely, and there will be only the sound of the water, and the rustle of the wind, and the slow, steady beating of your own heart. That is as it should be. The best stories do not end. They dissolve. They become part of the air you breathe, the darkness behind your closed eyes, the quiet space between waking and sleeping, where anything is possible and nothing is required. You do not need to remember the details. You do not need to remember the names. You only need to have been here, in this place, at this hour, with the river moving and the stars turning and the old stories settling into your bones like rain into dry earth. The temple gopurams stand against the sky, their outlines sharp where the stars are bright, blurred where the darkness is thick. They are beautiful in the way that an old tree is beautiful, or a mountain, or the sea. They have been here for centuries. They will be here for centuries more. They do not care whether anyone sees them. They do not care whether anyone remembers their name. They simply stand, carved stone upon carved stone, figure upon figure, story upon story, all of it frozen in a moment that never ends. The gods and goddesses on their surfaces are still dancing, still fighting, still blessing, still cursing. The elephants are still marching, the horses are still rearing, the warriors are still raising their swords. None of it moves, all of it moves. That is the mystery of stone. That is the mystery of time. And somewhere, in the darkness, the last lamp burns. Not a real lamp, not anymore. The memory of a lamp. The idea of a lamp. The feeling of warmth that comes from knowing that once, in this place, someone waited for someone else to come home. The flame is small and unsteady, the oil almost gone, but it has not yet gone out. It flickers, it wavers, it throws shadows on walls that are no longer there. As long as it burns, even in memory, even in story, the house is not empty. The man who lived there is not completely gone. The stories he told are not finished. They are just waiting. Waiting for the next listener. Waiting for the next breath. Waiting for the moment when someone closes their eyes and says, without words, without effort, I am ready. Tell me. The river answers. The river has always been the answer, even when no one was asking. It says, in the language of water moving over stone, that nothing ends, that everything flows into everything else, that the laughter of a jester poet in the court of a long-dead king is the same laughter that a child will feel tomorrow, watching a butterfly land on a flower, or a grandmother will feel, remembering the face of someone she loved. Laughter does not die. It just changes form. It becomes a breeze. It becomes a ripple on the water. It becomes the soft exhalation of a sleeper who is dreaming of something they cannot name. The stars are fading now, the darkness softening at the edges, the first hint of grey light appearing behind the eastern hills. Dawn is coming. It comes slowly, without announcement, the way all good things come. The river catches the first light and turns from silver to gold, from gold to rose, from rose to the clear, pale blue of morning. The temple gopurams emerge from the darkness, one detail at a time, a carved hand, a stone flower, the curve of an elephant's trunk. The bazaar is still empty, but the emptiness is different now. Not the emptiness of abandonment, the emptiness of anticipation. The merchants will come soon, with their carts and their goods and their voices. The pilgrims will come soon, with their offerings and their prayers. The children will come soon, with their laughter and their games. The city that was dead is waking. The story that seemed to end is beginning again. But you will not be here for that. You are drifting now, floating, carried by something gentler than the river and softer than the wind. The voice that has been speaking has become a hum, and the hum has become a feeling, and the feeling has become the darkness behind your closed eyes. The weight of your body has dissolved. The thoughts that churned and circled have slowed and settled. There is nothing left to do now. Nothing left to remember. Nothing left to understand. Only the sound of the water. Only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. only the quiet, patient darkness that holds you like a mother holds a child, warm and safe and utterly without demand. The lamp flickers one last time. The flame rises, falls and goes out. The room is dark. The house is dark. The city is dark. Somewhere in the space between the stars, the stories continue. They do not need light. They do not need voices. They exist in the spaces between people, in the pauses between breaths, in the silence that follows a laugh and the silence that precedes a dream. Tenali Rama is not gone. He is here. In the river and the stone and the fading embers of the last lamp. In the shape of the banyan tree and the sound of the night bird and the soft, cool air that settles on your skin like a blessing. In the story that you will not remember tomorrow, but that will stay with you anyway. Lodged somewhere beneath thought, somewhere beneath memory. In the deep, quiet place where all the old stories live. The river moves, the stars turn. The world, without hurry, moves on. The dawn comes slowly to the ruins of Hampi, as it has come every morning for 500 years. The light does not arrive all at once. It seeps in from the edges, a pale gold that touches the highest stones first, then moves downward, slowly, patiently, until the whole landscape is revealed. The granite hills turn from black to grey, to rose to gold. The river, silver under the stars, becomes blue under the sky, then green where the shadows of the trees fall across it, then white where it breaks against the rocks. The birds begin to sing, not all at once, but one by one, as if they are taking turns, as if they understand that the morning is a gift and should be unwrapped slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings, once, twice, 3 times. The sound carries across the water, soft and sweet, and fades into the air like smoke. What remains of Vijayanagara is not a city anymore, a place of pilgrimage, a place of memory, a place where tourists walk among the stones and try to imagine what it must have been like when the streets were full and the markets were loud and the king sat on his golden throne. They take photographs, they read guidebooks, they listen to guides who recite facts and dates and names. The guides cannot tell them what really mattered. The laughter. The jester poets who made a king forget he was a king. The stories that travelled further than any army. The way a well-told joke can outlast an empire. That knowledge is not in the guidebooks. It is in the stones themselves, if you know how to listen. In the wind that moves through the broken pillars. In the water that laps against the river steps. In the shadows that shift across the carved figures of gods and goddesses who have been dancing for centuries and will dance for centuries more. The stones of Hampi still stand. Worn now, the edges softened, the details blurred. The elephants have lost their trunks in some places, their riders in others. The horses have lost their legs, their tails, the reins that once connected them to the hands of their drivers. The gods and goddesses are harder to recognise, their features smoothed by rain and wind and the slow, patient work of time. They are still there. They still tell their stories, even if the stories have become harder to read. A child walking through the ruins might stop in front of a carving and see something that no adult can see. A face in the stone, a gesture, a moment of recognition that has nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with wonder. That child will grow up and tell stories to her own children. The stories will be different from the ones carved into the stone. They will be connected. Part of the same river, the same unbroken flow of telling and listening that has been moving through the world since the first human voice spoke the first human word. Near the place where Tenali Rama was born, a town still bears his name. Tenali, not a large town, not a famous town, not the kind of town that appears in guidebooks or history textbooks. A quiet place, a working place, a place where people go about their lives without thinking too much about the past. The name is there, On the maps, on the signs at the railway station, in the mouths of the people who live there, who say it every day without thinking, just as they say the names of their streets and their shops and their neighbours. Tenali, the name of the town, the name of the man, the name that has become so woven into the fabric of the place that it is impossible to say where the town ends and the legend begins. The people of Tenali tell stories about their famous sun, in the market and the tea shops, in the temples and the schools, in the evenings when the work is done and the families gather. They do not tell them as history. They tell them as something closer to weather, a natural part of life, something that has always been there and always will be. A father tells his son about the time Tenali Rama outwitted the court poets. A mother tells her daughter about the time Tenali Rama gave the mango to the child. A grandmother tells her grandchildren about the time Tenali Rama sat in silence with the king and changed a punishment into mercy. The stories are not memorized, not rehearsed. Told differently each time, with different details, different emphases, different punchlines. The shape remains. The shape of a man who used laughter to tell the truth. The shape of a man who held two bowls and refused to put either one down. The children who hear these stories do not think of them as ancient, not as history. They think of them as present, as alive, as something that belongs to them. When they laugh at Tenali Rama's jokes, they are laughing in the same moment as the children who laughed 500 years ago, in the same moment as the children who will laugh 500 years from now. Laughter is like that. It does not age. It does not fade. The one thing that connects all humans across all time. The one language that needs no translation. The one gift that costs nothing and is worth everything. Tenali Rama understood this. He understood that laughter is not a distraction from the serious business of life. It is the serious business of life. A person who cannot laugh has forgotten how to be human. A kingdom that cannot laugh at itself has already begun to die. The inheritance that Tenali Rama left behind was not gold or land or titles. Not a collection of poems written on palm leaves, not a school or a temple or a monument carved in stone. Something simpler, something rarer. He left behind laughter, the permission to laugh at power, the freedom to laugh at oneself, the understanding that the world is absurd and beautiful and heartbreaking and hilarious all at once, and that the only appropriate response is to hold all of those feelings together in the same breath, without letting any of them cancel any of the others. That was the gift of the two bowls. That was the blessing of the goddess. That was the thing that Tenali Rama carried from Thalluru to Vijayanagara, and from Vijayanagara into legend. There is a town in South India called Tenali. There are ruins on the banks of the Tungabhadra River called Hampi. There are stories told in 12 languages, in 100 countries, by people who have never seen the river, or the ruins, or the town. And there is laughter. Always laughter. The soft, surprised laughter of a child hearing a joke for the first time. The deep, knowing laughter of an adult who recognizes herself in the story. The quiet, exhausted laughter of someone who has been carrying too much and suddenly remembers how to put it down. That laughter is Tenali Rama's legacy. Not the name, not the dates, not the historical facts that scholars argue about. The laughter. The permission to laugh. The reminder that even in the darkest times, even in the most serious moments, there is room for a joke, a story, a moment of connection between one human heart and another. The stones of Hampi will not last forever. Nothing lasts forever. The river will change course, eventually, or dry up, or be diverted by people who need its water for their fields. The granite hills will erode, grain by grain, until they are sand and the sand is carried to the sea. The town of Tenali will grow or shrink or change its name or disappear entirely. The stories will remain. Stories are not made of stone. They are made of breath. Breath is the one thing that never runs out, never exhausts itself, never fails. As long as there are human lungs to draw air and human lips to shape words and human ears to hear, the stories will be told. Tenali Rama will outlive the river, outlive the hills, outlive the language he spoke and the kingdom he served and the very ground he walked on. He understood that the only thing that truly lasts is the thing that is passed from hand to hand, from mouth to ear, from heart to heart. The story, the laugh, the quiet moment of recognition when someone says, "Yes, I know that feeling. I have been there too." Imagine a grandmother in a village not far from Tenali. She is old now, her hands gnarled from years of work, her eyes clouded with cataracts, her voice thin and reedy. She is telling a story. The children are gathered around her, sitting on a faded rug, their legs crossed, their eyes wide. She tells them about the pot of gold and the Brahmin. She tells them about the mango tree. She tells them about the weeping sage. Her voice is not strong, it cracks sometimes, and she has to stop to cough, and the children wait patiently, because they know that the waiting is part of the story too. When she finishes, the children are quiet for a moment. One of them laughs, not loudly, a small laugh, a breath of amusement, a recognition that something funny has happened. The grandmother smiles. Her eyes, clouded as they are, seem to shine. In that moment, Tenali Rama is alive, not as a memory, not as a historical figure, as a presence, as a laugh, as a story that is being told right now in this place to these children by this grandmother who learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from hers, all the way back to the thin man from Thalluru who sat under a banyan tree and told stories to the village children because that was the only thing he had to give. The carved stones of Hampi are still standing, protected now, preserved, studied by archaeologists and admired by tourists. The government has built walkways and railings and information boards, an entrance fee and a parking lot and a souvenir shop. The stones do not mind, they have been through worse. Abandonment and neglect, and the slow reclamation of the jungle, earthquakes and monsoons, and the careless feet of those who did not know what they were walking on. They are still standing. They will still be standing long after the tourists have gone home, and the souvenir shop has closed, and the information boards have faded to illegibility. The stories carved into them, the elephants, the horses, the warriors, the gods, will still be telling their silent tales to anyone who pauses long enough to look. The stories that matter most are not carved in stone, they are carved in something softer. The memory of a child who heard a joke and remembered it. The laugh lines around the eyes of an old woman who has told the same story 1,000 times and still finds something new in it. The silence between the telling and the listening, where the story lives for a moment, held in the air like a bird in flight, before it passes to someone else. Those stories cannot be preserved, cannot be protected, cannot be put behind glass or catalogued in a database. They exist only in the moment of telling, and then they are gone, and then they are told again, and then they are gone again, and on forever, until the last human voice falls silent. That is their beauty, their fragility, their power. Tenali Rama knew this. He knew that his stories would not last if they were written down and locked away. They would last only if they were told. Told and retold. Changed and reshaped. Adapted to new audiences, new languages, new times. He did not want his stories to be preserved. He wanted them to be alive. They are alive in the laughter of a child in Chennai, hearing about the mango tree for the first time. in the smile of a tired worker in Mumbai, remembering a joke that his grandfather told him. In the quiet exhalation of a listener somewhere in the dark, drifting towards sleep, held by the sound of a voice that seems to come from very far away and very close at the same time. That is the inheritance. That is the legacy. That is the gift that Tenali Rama gave to the world, not knowing that it would outlast him, not caring whether it would, simply giving it because giving was what he did. The river moves, the stars turn, the stories continue. Somewhere, in a small house on a quiet street, a lamp burns low. The oil is almost gone. The flame is small and unsteady. It has not gone out. It will not go out. Not as long as there is someone to tell the stories and someone to listen. Not as long as there is laughter in the world. Not as long as the river moves and the stars turn and the night settles gently over everything, carrying the old tales forward, one breath at a time, one heart at a time, one quiet moment of connection at a time. Tenali Rama is not gone. He is here, in the laughter, in the story, in the space between your breathing and the silence, where all the old things live, waiting to be remembered. And now, the river. Always the river. It has been here from the beginning, moving through the darkness, carrying the light of the stars on its surface, carrying the silence of the hills in its depths. It does not ask where it is going. It does not remember where it has been. It simply moves, because moving is what rivers do. The sound of it is the oldest sound in the world, older than any story, older than any laughter, older than the first breath drawn by the first pair of lungs that ever learned to sigh. The lamp on the small table beside the bed is burning low. The flame is small now, no larger than a child's fingernail. It flickers with each breath of air that passes through the open window. The window looks out on the banyan tree, its roots descending from the branches like the fingers of a sleeping god, its leaves dark against the darker sky. Somewhere, beyond the tree, beyond the river, beyond the hills, the first hint of grey is appearing. Dawn is coming. Not yet. Not quite yet. There is still time for one more breath, one more moment of stillness, one more pause between the story and the silence. The voice that has been speaking is very faint now, very far away. The echo of an echo, the memory of a memory, the sound of something that happened a long time ago and has been travelling ever since, growing softer with each passing mile. You cannot quite hear the words anymore. You cannot quite follow the shape of the tale. You can feel something. A warmth, a presence, a sense that you are not alone. Someone is there with you in the darkness. Someone who knows the old stories and is willing to share them, not because they are important, but because sharing is what stories are for. The river moves. The lamp flickers. The banyan tree stands, patient and still, its roots reaching down toward the earth, its branches reaching up toward the stars. Somewhere, in the space between waking and sleeping, between telling and listening, between one breath and the next, the story lets go. It does not end. It does not close. It simply releases its hold, the way a river releases a leaf it has been carrying, letting it drift into the shallows, letting it rest against a stone, letting it be still. The leaf does not sink. It does not float away. It just rests. The river continues. The stars continue. The darkness continues, soft and warm and full of the promise of sleep. There is nothing more to say, nothing more to hear, only the quiet, only the breath, only the slow, steady fading of everything that is not this moment, this stillness, this gentle release into the night. The lamp goes out. The room is dark. The world is dark. You are floating, drifting, carried by something that has no name and needs none. something that has been carrying sleepers since the first sleeper closed their eyes and dreamed. The river moves, the stars turn, the silence deepens. Somewhere, very far away, a voice whispers one last time. Not in words, but in feeling. Not in sound, but in presence. It says, rest. And you do.